Prologue. Dr. Mark Ruthgar, medical doctor, doctor of philosophy, specialist in astrobiology, stepped into the comfortable Copenhagen summer night, crossed the street into the park, and with the trees partially shielding him from the city lights, looked up at what few stars he could make out. After another long day of teaching, advising, and trying to coordinate some research on new microbes brought back from the colonies, Dr. Ruthgar needed a break. Humans had developed faster than light, FTL travel, almost 50 years before, but the vast distances of space meant that they still hadn't spread all that far. There are only about 83 stars within 20 light-years of Earth, and only a handful of them are orbited by colonizable planets. Even traveling at 50 times the speed of light, it still takes a month to get to the nearest colony, and 4 months to get to the farthest, creating a situation not unlike exploration by sailing ships centuries before. The colonizable worlds found thus far had oxygen-producing life, but nothing more sentient than moss. As Dr. Ruthgar breathed in the cool summer air and stared up at a group of stars in the vicinity of the constellation Cygnus, he had no way of knowing that he was looking right at the first contact between humans and another sentient species, taking place near a small yellow star 25 light-years away. It would be another 6 months before news of the Dawnflower incident reached Earth. Dawnflower. Master Sensor Operator Nolde is sitting in his cabin pondering a framed picture of his daughter Nala. The picture, taken some 6 years earlier, shows her standing on the porch of their home back on Reladan. Nolde's home was typical of single-family residences all across the Reladi homeworld, a mostly underground structure accessed through an above-ground cupola surrounded by a covered porch. The railing along the east side of Nolde's porch supported a vine called a dawnflower. Nolde came up to the porch nearly every morning to watch the flowers on the vines slowly unfold into the light of the rising sun. When fully opened, the 8 violet petals formed a flower the size of Gunolda's hand, with his 4 fingers and 2 opposable thumbs spread out. The flowers tracked the sun until mid-morning, when in the rising heat the petals rolled back up again until the next morning. Since Reladan has no axial tilt, it has no seasons, and the dawnflower blooms anew every sunny day, all year long. For this reason, the Reladi people view the dawnflower as a symbol of a new morning, of hope. On the morning of the picture, their last morning in that house, Nala came up to join him. Reladi have 2 legs, 2 arms, 2 rather widely spaced eyes, and a thin layer of fur the same light brown color as the dust of the plains. In the picture, Nala was wearing casual pants and a blouse of the same violet as the dawnflowers beside her. Nolde takes a breath, gently sets the picture aside, and reports to duty on the bridge. A challenge of FTL travel is that space is really vast, and there is an exponential relationship between velocity and the reactant mass required to maintain that velocity. It's not like sublight travel, where it takes energy to reach a velocity and then you coast at that velocity. In FTL, space itself causes drag. If you are traveling from one known point to another, you can figure out how much reactant you're going to need. But deep space exploration is very limited if you only have a fixed amount of reactant. This ship, the Dawnflower, was purpose-built for deep space exploration, and it solves the range problem by collecting more reactant mass from each star it visits. The Dawnflower has been in orbit in the habitable zone of an unnamed yellow dwarf star for 15 days now. Its 8 gossamer thin collectors radiating outward, like the petals of the ship's namesake flower, always facing the sun, sifting through the solar wind to select the small percentage of particles that were of the right kind to form the needed reactant mass. In 5 more days, the ship will have collected a full supply and be ready to move on to the next star. With its enormous engines, the Dawnflower can move extraordinarily fast between stars, but then needs to take many days, depending on the star, to reload. Like nearly all R'lyadi ships, the Dawnflower is unarmed, and the R'lyadi built it with the idea that it could simply outrun any threats it might encounter. The Dawnflower has currently been out for 2 years, and will be returning home in another 60 days or so. On this voyage, they have already investigated 12 different star systems, a couple of which had interesting planets, but most of which didn't, and were now 10 light-years rimward of Runolog, the R'lyadi colony world, that itself is 20 light-years rimward from R'lydan. As Nolde took his seat on the bridge, Petal Control Officer Nagla maintained a casual vigil over her status displays, occasionally reaching around the growing belly of her advanced pregnancy to make a few minor optimizations. As she did so, she couldn't help but look tenderly aside at Nolde, the father of her child. Both Nagla and Nolde were getting a little old for starting a new family, and both had now adult children from prior pairings, but this voyage had been long, and when it was over, both of them thought about early retirement and settling down planetside. They may be getting older, but, thought Nagla, Gnolde is still a very handsome R'lyadi, his dust-tan fur not yet showing a trace of grey, even around his jaw. Gnolde was currently idly adjusting the sensor arrays to scan the far reaches of the current solar system. He had long since investigated the uninhabitable and largely uninteresting planets and space debris of the inner system, and now turned the ship's sensors outward, all the while fully aware of Nagla's attention. All of Nagla and Nolde's furtive glances, shared smiles, and dreamy introspection came to an abrupt halt when Nolde's sensors lit up. Another ship had just dropped out of FTL just inside the heliopause, and it couldn't be Our Lady's ship, not out here. Nolde called out, "New contact! Unknown vessel has entered the system." Captain Gnabin directed Nagla to initiate the now seemingly long process of folding in the massive collectors, just in case the ship had to maneuver and move to look over Nolde's shoulder. Minutes later, eyes wide and ears pressed tight against his head, Nolde reported, "Captain, they entered the system 0.3 radians around from us at a distance of nearly 15 billion kilometers, just inside the heliopause. Within 15 minutes they adjusted to an intercept course. Captain, we were sunward, stationary, and hardly emitting at all, and yet they detected us almost immediately. We have been sitting here for 15 days, plenty of time for our image to project out there, but it will be another 13 hours before the light from them reaches us. I think we can assume that they have better sensors than us, and more information for those sensors to pick up." Captain Nabin responded by directing the helm that as soon as the collectors were secure, the Dawnflower shall head out of the gravity well. Physics and the vast distances of space are immutable and unforgiving. Once the Dawnflower was ready to break orbit, it still took a full day to accelerate and climb out of the gravity well of the yellow dwarf, even with those massive engines. During that time, the unknown ship adjusted its intercept course and used a slingshot maneuver to close the distance considerably. This gave Nolde his first really good look at their pursuer, and the news was not good. Gnolde, Captain Gnabin, and half the bridge crew were gathered around Nolde's displays as he reported, "This is a completely alien ship. I am speculating, but my best guess is that these bumps around the front of the ship suggest a vast multi-technology sensor network, which is consistent with their early detection of us. These protrusions here, and again over here are reminiscent of a weapon I've seen before, except much larger. My guess is we are looking at a predator, a really big predator. The good news is that I don't see anything that looks like collectors, so they may be fuel limited, and the size of their engines compared to their overall mass suggests that their top speed in FTL may be less than half of the Dawnflower. So we run, said Captain Nabin. They did not know where the alien ship came from and did not want to risk running right into its home system. Captain Nabin made the decision to retreat to the red dwarf system they had explored previously, even though it was not the closest option. The moment they got close enough to the heliopause of the yellow star, he ordered FTL at maximum speed. This would consume a ludicrous amount of their collected reactant mass, but getting away from the alien ship was paramount. The Dawnflower was unarmed, while, if Nolde was right in his analysis, the thing pursuing them was a veritable pincushion of weapons. It only took a couple of days to get to the red dwarf, and another day to maneuver as close as they dared to maximize collection. The massive petals were unfolded, and the crew sat back to wait. Red dwarfs were frustratingly dim in the amount of reactant in their solar winds, so full recharge was going to take upwards of 40 days. 30 days in, the new contact alarm again sounded. There, on the edge of the heliopause, at the exact point that the Dawnflower had entered the system, that same alien ship emerged from FTL. "How?" hissed Captain Nabin. "Somehow they figured out our exact trajectory. Perhaps based on our last vector prior to FTL," suggested Nagla. Captain Gnabin pondered that possibility while the collector was being stowed once again. "Helm, plot a course for that nearest blue giant and calculate the 1/3 point. We will do an in-FTL hard turn and proceed back to that yellow star. We don't want to keep backtracking our outward path and risk inadvertently leading these, whatever they are, to Runolog. Turns in FTL, as in sublight, burn as much fuel as linear acceleration, so the Dawnflower was forced to proceed at well less than maximum speed after the turn to conserve reactant mass. Even still, it arrived back at the yellow star nearly depleted. They unfolded the collectors as soon as they exited FTL to capture every additional particle, even as they worked their way to a more advantageous location, deeper in the gravity well. Maneuvering with the fragile collectors deployed was risky, but the captain and crew were rattled. Everybody hoped Nagla's suggestion was correct, and the thing pursuing them would continue onto the blue giant. But what if it actually could detect their FTL trail? The Rladi didn't have the technology to do that, but that didn't mean someone else wouldn't. All of the predators the Rladi had ever encountered in the past always hunted the same way: sneak up as close to their prey as they could, and then make a fast dash to close the distance. Always before, if the prey could get a head start, the predator would just give up. Captain Nabin was trying to get his head around a pursuer that actively followed his trail, slowly for sure, but relentlessly. The Dawnflower was not built to escape such a thing. Only 8 days later, their worst fears were confirmed when the alien ship once again appeared, this time radiating them with long-wave electromagnetic energy as soon as it got within 40 light minutes. Such frequencies, at such low power, are harmless, but since the Rladi didn't know the purpose of this new behavior, they assumed the worst, and panic grew to a crescendo. The moment the collectors were folded, they attempted an FTL transition from too deep in the gravity well, and the improperly folding space sapped their already low reserves. The Dawnflower ran out of reactant mass only light hours short of the heliopause of their destination and dropped back into normal space. The crew desperately tried to unfurl the collectors, but there wasn't enough power left, and the effort drained their last reserves. As system after system shut down, the Dawnflower grew dark and cooled off. Huddled together with Nagla in his arms, Nolde reflected that his daughter Nala, back home, would never know that she had a little sister. One by one, in the blackness and silence, the Rladi succumbed to the cold. Nagla, Nolde, and their unborn child were frozen solid, still huddled together when, days later, the alien ship appeared beside the Dawnflower. There was nobody left to witness a small shuttle from their pursuer attach itself to the Dawnflower, penetrate the pressure hull, and inject a small robot inside. Petrol. Aboard the Anglo-Euro Union deep space exploration ship Petrel, 25 light-years hubward from Earth. Captain Joe Nguyen stared at the ghostly images being returned as Officer David Mikera Nagata, Boomer to anybody that knew him, carefully maneuvered the robot through the alien ship. Closed doors had to be cut through because there was no power to open them. Corpses. Alien bodies. The first spacefaring aliens ever discovered by humans, and they were all dead. Many of the bodies were still at their stations, forming a haunting image in the darkness. Water vapor had long since frozen and coated the bodies with a sparkling sheen of ice. Temperatures were so cold that the carbon dioxide was starting to freeze out of the atmosphere. In the dark of interstellar space, it would get much colder still. There wasn't a dry eye on the bridge of the Petrel as captain and crew took in the tragic scene. How had first contact gone so horribly wrong? Standing beside Captain Nguyen in silence, information specialist Almasi Mwangi wrapped her hand around his. "I was braced for, I don't know, little grey men with big heads, or even Cthulhu," whispered Captain Nguyen, "but not this. I grew up in southern Nebraska, and to me, these look like prairie dogs. Human-sized, intelligent, bipedal prairie dogs." Specialist Mwangi held his hand tighter. "Yes, monsters I could handle, but these are cute." 10 weeks earlier. The Petrel was an older model long-range frigate left over from the Separatist War. The first Separatist War, thought Captain Nguyen, because you just know there are going to be more. Humans will never stop forming factions, if only to have something to fight about. It belonged to the Anglo-Euro Union, but by convention every faction shared all deep space knowledge, so it was not unusual that the Petrel's crew included a few members from other factions. The Petrel could do in excess of 100 C for a short period, but it was its ability to do 50 C for a couple of years, on one enormous load of reactant mass, that made it ideal for these kinds of missions. It had been out for nearly 10 months now, working its way hubward along the Orion Spur, and Captain Nguyen was thinking that they would turn back and rendezvous with a tanker after exploring maybe 1 or 2 more star systems. They had mapped several systems with useful resources, 2 systems with planets that could be seeded with primitive life to kick-start the formation of a usable atmosphere, if you don't mind making 10,000-year plans, and 1 system with a planet that already had water, photosynthetic life, and a usable atmosphere. Back near Earth, at least 1 colony ship will surely be assembled for that one, Captain Nguyen reminisced. Time in transit dragged. The captain was bored. The crew was bored. They were coming up on yet another star. At least this one was a rather promising yellow dwarf. The Petrel dropped out of FTL just inside the heliopause and began scanning for planets and other basic features, as well as radio frequency transmissions, FTL wakes, and other evidence that the system might be occupied. All standard procedures when entering a new system. Even still, they would have missed the alien artifact, drifting silently in the habitable zone if it weren't for those incredibly huge petals radiating from it like a cosmic purple daisy. The bridge of the Petrel erupted with excitement. An alien space-faring race. At first, the bridge crew thought it was a space station of some kind. It wasn't clear if the Petrel had been spotted, or if the alien object was armed, or perhaps had company lurking about. They approached with stealthy caution. Then, the unexpected. The artifact gracefully folded those beautiful petals and moved, or rather bolted, for the heliopause. When it got there, it burst into FTL, leaving an impressive wake behind. The Petrel's sensor officers gasped. That alien artifact was a spaceship, and it was fast. Everybody on the Petrel's bridge just stared for a while in awed silence at the place where the alien ship had been. Finally, Captain Nguyen ordered, "Go after them. Let's see where they lead us. Make speed 50C. It could be a long chase." Once the Petrel was underway, the sensor operators kept busy looking for the telltale traces of reactant exhaust and disturbed dark matter that characterized an FTL drive wake. The alien ship was moving in excess of 200C, so following the wake was not hard, but if it was heading to the red dwarf that the trail suggested, the Petrel would get there weeks later. During the transit, various experts on the Petrel went over what little data they had managed to collect in the brief encounter to try to make sense of the alien ship, and the results were confusing. By modeling the acceleration of the ship prior to FTL and the propulsive material ejected, they could get a pretty good estimate of the ship's mass. But the ship was light. It couldn't be carrying enough reactant to sustain the observed FTL velocity for more than a few days. It was a mystery. Maybe the petals had something to do with it. The crew became all the more eager to meet these strange new aliens. The Petrel was going to achieve first contact. At the red dwarf, the pattern repeated. The alien ship was there, with its daisy petals unfolded, but again, as soon as it detected the Petrel, it bolted. This time, following it was a little trickier. Instead of going directly to the blue giant as the wake suggested, it doubled back towards the yellow dwarf and slowed down, leaving a much smaller and harder-to-follow wake. Very clever, thought Captain Nguyen. The Petrel lost several days at the point of the turn before it reacquired the trail. Back at the yellow dwarf, the pattern repeated again, but something seemed to be off. It was hard to put into words. More of a feeling, really. But it seemed to the sensor operators on the Petrel that the alien vessel was not executing its operations as precisely anymore, and its transition to FTL was sloppy. Then, 10 weeks into the chase, the Petrel lost the trail. One moment the FTL wake was in front of them, and then it just faded away. They circled for a while trying to find it, and then dropped out of FTL to conserve reactant while they pondered their next move. They were shocked when they dropped into normal deep space well outside the heliopause of any star and found themselves within sensor range of the alien ship, its beautiful petals partially unfolded like a sad, wilted rose. Temperature measurements showed that the Petrel had arrived too late. There would be no first contact. Instead, Pilot Nagata shuttled his remotely operated vehicle to the alien ship and began the investigation. He felt not unlike a tomb robber, working his way through the dark passageways. The Petrel did not have the means to tow the alien spacecraft the 25 light-years back to Earth. The crew would have to collect what artifacts they could safely store and then mark the wreckage for further investigation later. This meant weeks of carefully looting things that looked like communications gear, computers, and especially computer storage elements, other possibly interesting technology, samples of food and food preparation from the galley, a sample of frozen sewage from the waste disposal system, personal effects that might offer clues to an alien culture, and 2 corpses. The bodies they chose were a couple, locked in a frozen embrace. This would hopefully give the biologists clues to any gender differentiation within this species. The ROV was a relic from the Petrel's time in the Separatist War, and nobody was expecting to be in the position of taking on alien artifacts, so the crew had to improvise biohazard protocols as best they could. It was physically and emotionally taxing work, but hopefully they grabbed the right items to allow better-equipped researchers to answer the question of what went wrong and create a plan to find and communicate with this species. Then came the 6-month return journey itself, with way too much time for thinking about what had happened and dwelling on all manner of regrets. Nala. 6 years before the Dawnflower incident and 30 light-years further hubward. Today, Nala and her father Gnolda are leaving the house she grew up in. She has just graduated with an entry-level degree in agriculture and had wanted to explore the planet, but her father got promoted to master sensor operator with all the privileges that come with that, and this is the first time that his adult daughter would be allowed to join him. Nala was Gnolda's only child, and he wasn't subtle about wanting her to follow his path into space, cajoling her until she finally agreed to try a journey. Nala joined her father on the porch with her travel bags. Today, Nala is wearing casual pants and a blouse of the same violet as the dawnflowers beside her. To a human, she would seem to be of average height, but more of that height is torso and less is leg than for humans. A human might also notice that the positioning of her eyes provides exceptional peripheral vision at the expense of slightly degraded depth perception. To proud Father Nolda, she is beautiful, and so, like any father, he takes a picture, Nala, the porch, the dawnflowers. Then they lifted their bags and went on their way. When the Reladi first achieved interstellar travel, they discovered that not one, but 2 star systems within just a couple light-years of Erladen had habitable planets with vast prairies much like their own homeworld. A spaceship moving at only 50 C could reach them in only 10 to 20 days. But as the Reladi explored outward, nothing. Planets outside their stars' habitable zones, planets with no breathable atmosphere, or planets with countless other problems abound. But planets that are close enough in character to Rilladan to be colonizable are very rare. The Herladii didn't find another one until, after nearly 70 years of searching, hindered in part by the range of their ships, they had reached nearly 20 light-years rimward out the local galactic spur. Then, the Ladi found a planet they called Nolog. It was so much like Rilladan, Sun's intelligent life, as to make one weep. Soon, a mass migration of colonists was underway. The Reladi freighters, running at a reactant-conserving 50 C, took 140 days to make the transit from Rilladan to Renolog. Nolda and Nala got posted to one such freighter. Nolda, as master sensor operator, spent most of his time on the bridge. Nala, for her part, spent most of her time with the merchants and colonists during the hours her father was on duty. But on the 70th day, when the general quarters alert sounded its ear-splitting chirp, instead of going to her room, Nala ran to her father on the bridge. From that vantage point, she was able to see a despoiler close in on the herd. The despoilers, small armed craft of unknown origin, had first shown up about 10 years earlier. They must have a homeworld near the halfway point of the route, because they always attacked Erladi freighters at that point. But they never followed the freighters very far, and were suspected therefore of being extremely range-limited. The Erladi response, mimicking the great herbivores of the grasslands, was to group their freighters into herds. When the despoilers, never more than 1 or 2 at a time, attacked, the whole herd would accelerate for a short period to try to outrun the attackers. More ships in the herd meant more sensors and a better chance of getting a head start on the despoilers. The Reladi did not hunt other animals, nor, with their single unified government, did they fight each other in large numbers. As a result, it simply never occurred to them to build specialized armed spacecraft for the sole purpose of actually fighting the despoilers. In human terms, their herd was a caravan, not a convoy. On sighting the despoiler, the ships of the herd began to accelerate. 4 hours into the chase, Nala's father got her attention and pointed at his displays. Nolda showed her the telltale plume of a reactant leak on a neighboring ship and explained how to detect the rhythmic pulse in the ship's wake. As they watched, the leaking freighter fell behind, with the despoiler closing in on it. What will happen to them? asked Nala. Gnolder paused a moment before answering, "We'll never see them again." Watching the hapless freighter fall out of sight of the sensors, Nala decided a career on spaceships was not for her. On Renolog, despite her father's protestations that space travel wasn't always like that, Nala went back to school, this time focusing on zoology and specifically on predators. The despoiler attack had really affected Nala, and her father had always said the best way to overcome your fears was to face them. It turned out Nala had a knack for the topic. In a couple of years, Nala had run off the end of the curriculum of the provincial university on this colony world, and had gotten accepted at one of the prestigious schools back on Reladan. 4 years after her father had first taken her into space, Nala boarded a freighter of the herd to make the transit for the second time. Just a few weeks after seeing Nala off, her father Gnolder landed his dream assignment, chief sensor operator on the newly built Dawnflower, one of a new class of deep space exploration vessels capable of collecting reactant from the stars they visited. Post-mortem. When the Petrel got close enough to Earth space to start sending messages, things got crazy quickly. First, the entire ship needed to be quarantined to prevent possible contamination from the alien species, and then suitable research facilities needed to be organized to investigate the artifacts. Representatives from every faction had opinions about every aspect. What does it mean to humans that another spacefaring species has been found? Who will go recover the wreckage and how? How will first contact with this species be implemented to avoid a similar catastrophe to this one, or worse, biological contamination from humans to aliens? Accidentally killing one ship is bad, but what if humans accidentally kill off an entire planet? It wasn't long before a massive research effort and its parallel diplomatic effort were underway. The first breakthrough came from information specialist Almasi Mwangi herself. On the long journey back to human space, she had successfully identified markers in the recovered data storage media that allowed her to separate recordings of voice and video from other digital data. This meant that some of the alien ship's logs could be replayed. This was jumped on by linguists who, by comparing the aliens' logs of the encounter with the Petrel's logs of the encounter, were able to construct a sort of Rosetta Stone for the alien language. This in turn led to learning the ship's name, Dawnflower, the names of the crew, how their communications equipment worked, how their star charts worked, and much, much more. Humans now knew where the Reladi-occupied planets were and how to communicate with them. It also caused bureaucrats and intelligence services across the factions to realize how vulnerable humans were to other aliens capturing a human ship. There were going to have to be some serious redesigns for future deep space ships. Another set of breakthroughs came from a team headed up by Danish physician and biologist Mark Ruthgar and his team. The frozen pair brought back were indeed a middle-aged male and female named Nolder and Nagla, according to the linguists, and the female was pregnant. This gave the biologists an unexpected bonanza of information about anatomy and reproduction, as well as tissues for understanding what diseases the Orladi carried. Not that many, actually, and what human diseases could transfer to and hurt Reladi. Whoa, it's a good thing humans didn't discover a planet first. Earth produces some horrendous bugs. It took months to come up with decontamination treatments and protocols before any human would be able to approach Reladi space. New policy. Deep space exploration vessels will henceforth be required to have a fully equipped biolab and staff to evaluate the biological hazards between humans and newly contacted aliens in situ. The Petrel having to come all the way back to human space was, in retrospect, incredibly irresponsible. Yet another finding from the investigation focused on why the first contact went so badly in the first place. Captain Nguyen was gratified that he had not actually done anything wrong. It turns out that strolling around space with heavy weapons hanging out everywhere doesn't endear you to anybody. New policy: future deep space ships would holster their big guns. Hide and seek. At about the same time that the Petrel was arriving back at Earth, 55 light-years away, Nala became the Ladi equivalent of a full professor of zoology. Her final thesis was about the communal behavior of a small, hyperactive omnivore, a human might have mistaken it for a weasel, that lives in the forests north of the temperate grasslands of Reladen. This was a particularly tough environment in which to do research because of the limited visibility and claustrophobic closeness of the forest, the cooler temperatures, the jumble of fallen trees and vegetation, the many hidden predators, basically everything that made a forest different from the wide-open grasslands that most Aladi prefer. As a result, Nala found her field of study had little competition and lots of opportunities for discovery. By the time Nala had been the Ladi equivalent of a full professor for 2 years, she had already published 7 papers. 5 of them were about the social behavior of woodland predators, 1 was about survival in the northern forest, and 1 was about strategies for tracking and observing predators in their natural environment. Nala had also become proficient at moving silently, avoiding being seen by her subjects, and defending herself when necessary. Whenever she went into the forest, she always carried basic survival gear, a small quiet plasma gun, and a larger and very sharp knife. But even as her skill and confidence in the forest grew, she still had nightmares about spacecraft exploding, the harmonic of FTL drives failing, and despoilers closing in. The response from the scholarly community was not exactly what Nala had hoped. The Ladi were creatures of the prairie, and generally not comfortable with going into the forest. So Nala's forays, and especially her interest in predators, were disapproved of as weird. Funding was hard to come by. The critical need for funding was why Nala paid any attention at all when Gnissel, the son of Gnegan, a powerful oligarch and head of the Ladia Seda syndicate, contacted her with an offer of funding. Desperation and maybe just a little naivete allowed her to overlook concerning details. Gnissel wanted Nala to take him and his entourage with her into the forest and play tour guide as if they were in a zoo. Gnissel had that special entitlement that only the children of the very rich have, and he was absolutely certain that the elements themselves would bend to his whim. It became clear very quickly that Nala would really have to stay on her toes just to keep that arrogant buffoon and his clown show alive. Gnissel even had opinions about which way they should go, and forced the group through some thoroughly unnecessary terrain challenges, of which thorns and stinging plants were only the beginning. However, once Gnissel was ready to call a stop for the night relatively early in the afternoon, fortunately, since he wasn't exactly used to hard exercise, Nala managed to get some of the less dim members of the entourage to help build a sort of fence and clear an area within it, offering some protection against the creatures of the night. Finally, when everything seemed, well, less of a mess, Nala took the opportunity to slip off into the woods and try to do a little actual research, observing the local fauna. She was annoyed, therefore, when, attracted by an unexpected noise, she discovered that Gnissel and a good portion of his entourage left the encampment without her, and were making their way west. Curiosity and anger combined to make her track and observe them as she would any other group of animals, staying quiet, out of sight, and to the side of their trail. An hour or so later, the group came to the edge of an artificial clearing where another group was camping. Nala found herself an observation point a little to the south of Gnissel, just in time to see Gnissel's group, using a depression in the clearing as cover, move up close to the other group. From their vantage point, they charged forward in a broad line and, without a yell or word, systematically executed the 12 or so men and women they found there. Nala had no idea what this was all about, but this was not the time to find out. She slipped back into the forest and ran back to the encampment, much faster and quieter than Nissel's team would be able to follow. Once there, evading the 2 remaining guards, she gathered what few items she would need and faded back into the trees. Nala was certain at that moment that if Nissel ever saw her again, she was dead. She slipped silently off into the forest, leaving Nissel and his entourage to their fate with the predators of the forest. On the off chance that Nissel or any of his people somehow made it out alive, she went cross-country for days, heading for one of the lesser spaceports. There, under the assumed name Nasha, she hopped a bulk freighter that was about to join a herd for the perilous journey back to Runolog. It was only when she got to Runolog that she learned that the Dawnflower was 2 years overdue. First contact. 3 years after the Dawnflower incident, the Anglo-Euro Union sent a specially designed first contact fleet to Runolog. Everybody had gone through decontamination and had received special training on how not to appear threatening. Since the Reladi were herbivores, it was decided that all humans making contact would pose as arboreal vegetarians. Trust us, we're not highly aggressive omnivores, we're just harmless lemurs. The plan was that their lead ships would take up stealth positions in the comet cloud around the Arnolog system, collect additional intelligence for a month or so, and choose a landing site. Then the ground team would go in, meet the locals, and negotiate for a place to put their embassy. Of course, all the factions had the same idea, and both the Asia Centauri People's Republic and the Bantu Republic managed to get there at about the same time. The Reladi had evolved as a herbivorous burrowing colony species in the vast grasslands of Rilladan, but tens of thousands of years ago began extending their burrows into above-ground structures and developing intentional agriculture. Rilladan was a remarkably benign world. No axial tilt meant uniform temperatures throughout the year. Numerous small seas pockmarked a planet-wide landmass where the entire temperate region was one vast grassland. The absence of natural divides meant a person with enough time could walk all the way around, and so the Reladi developed with one world language and, eventually, one world government. It simply never occurred to them that a star-faring species could evolve any other way. All of the Reladi colony worlds, including Runolog, were similarly benign and unified. So it was to the tremendous consternation and confusion of the Reladi when 3 separate groups of aliens came out of nowhere to land on their planet in 3 widely separate locations and asked, in Lady, to speak to their leader about setting up trade ports. Obviously, the high-ranking Arnolog planetary government officials weren't going to risk their own necks, so the local leaders nearest each landing site had to deal with the aliens face-to-face themselves. The initial assumption was that these were 3 different species with convergent evolutionary body types, but differentiated by facial features, skin color, and other physical features, as well as obviously speaking completely different languages within their own groups. Further, each group of aliens insisted on negotiating with the local Reladi separately from the other 2 groups and didn't recognize any agreements made with any other group. But the multi-species assumption was refuted by those who observed that a few members of each group looked like the dominant members of one of the other groups, and by the fact that the humans themselves claimed to be all one species. Are they one species, or are they 3 species? To the Reladi, who had never known more than one language, had never tried to communicate with any other species before, and due to having a unified government had no concept of treaties in the first place, this was complete insanity. Okay, it was almost complete insanity. Complete insanity was when the Glisa Caliphate landed 30 days later. If the Reladi had any concept of military, there might have been a war. As it was, the Reladi were so distressed that some of them considered just abandoning the planet entirely. Eventually, the humans worked things out between themselves and relations started to go smoother. But for that first half a year, it was pretty terrifying. Deep inside the trading port set up by the Bantu Republic, information specialist Almasi Mwangi was doing what she did best. Runolog had a planet-wide digital information network one might call an internet. But where the original internet on Earth had been developed by a government trying to make a network that was invulnerable to physical attack by another government, the Reladi system was built by commercial interests, notably banks, for commercial purposes, and then nationalized by the planetary government. This meant that where Earth's internet is connectionless and distributed, the Reladi system was more of a hub-and-spoke architecture where the banks are the hubs. Almasi had already cracked the Reladi encryption strategy while examining the Dawnflower, so now she created a virtual bank hub on the Reladi network and started watching the traffic flow. It was beautiful. There were only about 40 million Reladi on all of Arnolog, and between the four factions already on planet, Almasi Mwangi was able to cobble together enough computing power to track the online activity of all 40 million of them. Meanwhile, the folks over at the Anglo-Euro Union trading port had just bought themselves a derelict old Reladi freighter called the Nightdew for some reason. Word was that its whole bow was caved in, so why they wanted it was a bit of a mystery to the Reladi and the other humans. Nala had been on Runolog for about half a year when the humans first landed. One look at them, and she knew something was bogus. Locking knees and no opposable thumbs on their feet said these things hadn't been arboreal in at least 1,000,000 years, if ever. She avoided them and went back to watching small cute predators in the forest. New forest, new predators, but the same calm pleasure. She even wrote a few papers for local publications, under her assumed name Nasha, of course. Tom Kill Deer. 4 years after the Dawnflower incident, Captain Guyon, now on Earth, was called into a briefing to notify him of his new command. The Anglo-Euro Union Embassy on Runolog had learned that humans were not the first spacefaring alien species the Reladi had encountered. The despoilers, as the Reladi called them, were attacking freighters between Runolog and Ladan. But other than that, the Reladi seemed to know nothing about them. The embassy had thoughtfully acquired a scrapped Reladi freighter and completely reverse-engineered it and sent the plans and pictures back to Earth. Then, in record time, a visually exact replica had been made. The outside of the ship and those common areas that a port inspector might peek into would look exactly like the rusty old Nightdew had looked before the accident that had crushed its nose in. Everywhere a port inspector couldn't look was pure human, with those special touches no human would go into space without. The Nightdew had been cheaply built and had a shocking amount of inefficiently used space that the humans could exploit for hiding things from prying eyes. The human doppelganger of the Nightdew was named the Killdeer, and the plan was to insert it into a Reladi herd and try to find some despoilers. Captain Guyon first had to take his new Killdeer to Runolog and infiltrate a herd. Supposedly, the embassy there was working on that, but he would find out more when he got there. The good news, though, was that he got to take a good portion of his petrol crew with him, along with that young astrobiology professor, Dr. Mark Ruthgar, just in case they collected any specimens. Captain Guyon thought, with a touch of bitterness toward those that thought of this plan, it might be nice to meet intelligent spacefaring aliens without killing them. But at least this time, his ship would be properly equipped. As the Killdeer arrived in orbit above Runolog, Captain Guyon got his first look at the origin world of the Dawnflower. He had asked if he could carry the remains of those that died back to their home with him, but was denied. The lady did not yet know what had happened to the Dawnflower, and the bureaucrats back on Earth thought it best to keep things that way for as long as possible. Instead, Captain Nguyen offered a prayer for forgiveness as he stared out the viewport at the green and yellow grasslands of the world below. Thinking about those first images from inside the Dawnflower still made him melancholy. Finally, the Killdeer docked at Runnalog's orbiting hub station, and the captain and Dr. Ruthgar took a Our Lady shuttle to the Anglo-Euro Union trade port planetside. It didn't take long to learn that the embassy had been busy negotiating and had finally arranged that the Killdeer could join a herd in 30 days if it passed the expected inspection by the portmaster and if it agreed to take a Reladi representative along. Well, that was going to be tricky, thought Captain Nguyen. If his mission was a success, the Killdeer would never make it to Reladan. So what was he supposed to do with the representative? Well, first things first. The Killdeer had some extra staterooms in the front. One of them could be refitted for a Reladi. And food. They would need Reladi food. Well, that's what embassy staff are for. After some thought, Captain Nguyen called the Bantu Republic's embassy and asked Specialist Mwangi if she could give him some advance information about this representative. Almasi Mwangi had not heard about the Killdeer and was surprised when Captain Nguyen contacted her. After a little snooping, she decided this was a party she did not want to miss. In 6 hours, she was in his cabin negotiating for a place on his crew. 15 days later, Specialist Mwangi met alone with Captain Nguyen again. After satisfying herself that the room wasn't being monitored, she squealed, "Oh, Joe, you're going to love this or hate this, probably both." Almasi had discovered that the ambassador was being assigned by a bureaucrat named Naldich. But Minister Naldich had a problem. The insistence on a representative was a delaying tactic because she's growing very suspicious of us. But the builders have done a good job of making the Killdeer look, unmaintained. "You mean a death trap?" said the captain. "Exactly," replied Almasi. "So no Reladi official would take the job." "Okay, where does that leave us?" "Well," said Almasi, "we need for Minister Naldish to assign someone that won't be missed. No known relatives, for instance, and someone that won't totally freak out about never setting foot on Rilladan, like maybe someone that upset someone powerful. Right?" Consternation was written all over Captain Nguyen's face. "So, who exactly did you find? Who did they upset? And how do we get Minister Naldich to play along? You've obviously figured all this out, and you are starting to scare me." Almasi spent the next hour telling the captain how she had entertained herself building up profiles of all 40 million Reladi, and had discovered an anomaly. A labourer up north calling herself Nasha was spending her spare time writing up some excellent research on forest predators. Almasi cross-referenced them and found 7 papers that were produced by a certain Professor Nala on Rilladan matching the writing style. Nala disappeared from the web just before Nasha showed up on Unyielding almost 2 years ago. Almasi was drawn to this anomaly because, for unspecified reasons, a group calling themselves the Reladia Seda Syndicate put out a hit order on Professor Nala, and that hit order just propagated out to Runnalog. I guess they finally figured out Nala wasn't on Rilladan anymore. She's a very capable zoologist with no family, no friends, and a hit on her if she ever shows her face on Rilladan again. I think she would be a perfect permanent representative for us, Almasi concluded. The captain pondered it for a bit. Zoology, specifically of predators. It would be nice to keep our findings alive this time. Okay, I'll work with Mark to convert half of his lab into a zoo. How do we get Naldich to assign her? The convergence of bureaucracy and network issues are what I live for, said Almasi. I'll forge a directive from her bosses on Reladan and inject it into her inbox with all the proper authentication and top clearance encryption. The communications delay assures that we will be long gone before she can get any conflicting confirmation back. You are a very dangerous woman, said Zhou Nguyen. Once en route, we offer her sanctuary. She's dead otherwise, so we're not making her any worse off. The young woman in shackles was brought into Naldic's office by 2 officers. She was not resisting and looked lost. Naldic took the key and sent the officers away. "Shall I call you Nasha or Nala?" Naldic asked in her politest tone with a wonderfully faked kind smile on her face. Naldic had once dreamed of being an actress and was enjoying this. Nala paled visibly, and it was clear she was not as good an actress, causing Naldic to pout a little. "Nala," she continued, "I have 2 problems, and I believe you are the answer to both of them. 1, I have a deportation order for you from Reladan. It's a strange order in that it is stamped and authenticated from very high up, but it doesn't specify why you are being deported. It does, however, say that I am allowed discretion to use all necessary force to get you on a ship. 2, I have committed to placing a representative on a ship called the Killdeer in 2 weeks, but nobody on my staff will go near the thing. Nala, you will board the Killdeer in 2 weeks, and you will look like a lady government official when you do. If you fail to get on that ship, I will kill you. How's that for discretion to use all necessary force?" Nala looked down at her hands for a bit, then slowly raised her head. "Your phrasing is peculiar. I do not recognize the word Killdeer, and you said specifically a lady government official, as if there were some other kind. Can you please tell me more about this ship?" Naldic smiled, genuinely this time, and removed Nala's shackles. Then Naldic brought out videos and pictures and reports, and they talked. They talked about the Night Dew, they talked about the humans, and they talked about how to look and talk like a government official. The pictures of the damaged Night Dew were not inspiring, but Nala felt she had little choice. Over the next 2 weeks, Nala had a lot of homework to do, but she would get on that ship. Naldic was surprised when Nala told her that she was confident the humans were lying about being arboreal. Not surprised that the humans were lying, but pleasantly surprised that Nala caught it. "Nala, quite by accident, you may be the best possible candidate for this job." On the scheduled day of departure, Nala, now dressed in her black Arladi government outfit and with an appropriate amount of luggage, was escorted by Naldic up to the hub station to board the Killdeer. Nala's view of the Killdeer out the station windows was not inspiring. From bow to stern, no part of the ship was free of corrosion or pockmarks. The humans didn't even paint it, she thought to herself. Even the ship's name, Night Dew, was still vaguely visible under what appeared to be stencil-painted letters in a language she didn't know. From all appearances, getting on that wreck was a creative form of suicide, but Naldic was unambiguous about her options. Still, something about the sight nagged at Nala. Ahead at the boarding gate, 3 humans stood waiting for her. Blue, black, green. The male in the blue uniform had straight black fur on the top of his head and bare, light-colored skin with little to no fur on his exposed face, neck and hands. He introduced himself as Captain Zhou Nguyen and formally welcomed Ambassador Nala aboard. The female in the black uniform had curly black fur falling in cascades from the top of her head to below her shoulders and bare skin on her face and hands that was nearly as dark as her fur. She introduced herself as Security Specialist Almasi Mwangi. "Just call me Ms. Mwangi." Ms. Mwangi used a handheld data device to take a picture of Nala and print out a badge, and then had Nala make up and enter a personal identification code on the device. Since Nala couldn't read the symbols, she was careful to remember her pick-by-finger position. The final human, a male in a green sweater and pants that didn't look like a uniform at all, had light brown fur on his head, almost the color of Nala's, and his exposed skin was even lighter than the captain's skin. He introduced himself as Dr. Mark Ruthgar, the ship's physician and also a professor of biology. Nala, remembering that she was supposed to be an ambassador, not a zoologist, tried not to show undue interest in that last part. With introductions over, Mark picked up her bags and walked her down the concourse and into the Killdeer. For the first hour, Mark was her personal tour guide. He first took Nala to her room in the bow superstructure and showed her how to use her badge and pick to open the door. Apparently, one of the modifications that the humans had made was that you had to be wearing your badge and enter your pick to open any door on the ship, something called two-part authentication, and your badge would only open doors you were authorized to go through. Thus, assured Mark, only Nala and Miss Poi Mwangi could open the door to Nala's suite. First observation, thought Nala, humans aren't very trusting, even of each other. Having mastered the door codes, they then went on to see the bridge, the galley, the relaxation rooms, plural, Nala already knew how tedious space travel was, and so on, all located in the mid-superstructure. In doing so, they passed by the service doors to two of the four massive bulk cargo holds. They walked aft past the other two cargo holds, but did not go into the engine compartments in the aft superstructure, as neither Mark's nor Nala's badges would let them in. After the tour, Mark and Nala spent an hour in the galley, where Mark read some menu options to her and demonstrated how to request food. Nala was surprised to see that, in addition to the food the humans were eating, the galley was also equipped with Reladi menu items and Reladi eating utensils, designed for a species with two opposable thumbs on each hand, so watching Mark try to use them was hilarious. During their meal, Mark talked about himself a bit. He was a certified medical general practice doctor for the humans on the ship and had some training in related biologic processes as well, but he was also a professor in biology, and his other job on the ship was to study and document alien flora and fauna if and when they visited life-bearing planets. Nala thought that was a very strange profession for someone on a freighter, but hey, she was a zoologist. She decided not to comment. Mark encouraged Nala to try some of the human food and to note her opinion of it and if it caused any ill effects, as he was trying to compile a list of mutually consumable foods to promote future trade. After their meal, Mark left Nala in her room to get settled in. Nala had been on several freighters in her early years, and she had to admit her quarters on the Killdeer weren't bad. It was a bedroom, hygiene room, kitchen, sitting room suite furnished with Reladi fixtures and furniture. The Reladi fixtures were very thoughtful of the humans, she thought. She also noticed that they were quite new, and the room was very clean, unlike the communal spaces with their ubiquitous rust patches. Speaking of clean, she discovered the cabinet in the hygiene room was well stocked with towels and soaps and decided to try out her new fixtures, starting with a nice hot shower. With everybody aboard, the Killdeer departed the dock and formed up with the rest of the herd, about 40 freighters total, including 3 lightly armed bulls. By the time Nala emerged from her shower, the herd was starting its 140-day journey to the Reladan home cluster. Transit. Nala quickly fell into a routine that involved spending a lot of time with Mark in the recreation rooms, trying different games and activities. Mark, with no patients requiring medical care, also had little to do, which was a relief to Nala because apparently only Mark, Ms. Mwangi, and the captain spoke Reladi. Nala couldn't read the text or understand the spoken language in video media, so she was limited in which entertainment she could enjoy and who she could enjoy it with. Nala ate her meals with Mark so he could help her with the menu. Sometimes the captain or Ms. Mwangi joined them in the galley, but the rest of the crew seemed to mostly eat at different times. About 4 days into the trip, while the four of them were eating together, Nala noticed that while Mark was using a set of 3 metal utensils to eat his pasta dish, as she had seen him do before, the captain was coordinating 2 rods in one hand to eat his mix of rice and vegetables, and Ms. Mwangi was eating a variety of items by tearing off a piece of some kind of flat bread and pinching the food items within it. Mark informed her that this was a pretty good example of the 3 basic ways humans eat: flatware, chopsticks and fingers, while explaining that each technique was favored by roughly 1/3 of the human population. On a ship like the Killdeer, with such an eclectic crew, each crew member was likely to switch between methods, depending on exactly what they were eating at the time. Mark struggled a little bit to explain, because eclectic was not a word the homogeneous Urladi had a direct translation for. But, looking around the table, Nala was beginning to understand the concept. Since they were on the topic of what they were eating, Nala took the opening to ask about something that was bothering her. She depended on Mark to order food for her at each meal. There were a lot of humans on the ship, rather more than Nala thought should be required for a freighter of this size, actually, but apparently only the 3 currently at the table with her could speak Urladi. Nala inquired if they would be willing to work with her to help her learn to speak and read human. That brought a laugh out of Mark, and the captain almost choked on his food. It was Ms. Mwangi that came to her rescue. Humans speak over 6,000 different languages. However, many people speak 2 or more languages. That said, on any one starship, it is useful to standardize on one language. Most human starships have standardized on English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, Swahili, or Russian. So if you speak those 6 languages, you can talk to most people. The written language is similarly diverse. English and Spanish share a phonetic character set. Both Russian and Arabic have their own phonetic character sets. Swahili is often written using either the English or Arabic phonetic characters, and Mandarin is usually written using semantic symbols called logograms. The standard language on the Killdeer is English, so I suggest you start there. Nala recalled that Naldik had said something about humans at the 4 trading posts on Ronolog talking different languages among themselves, but the idea was so, well, alien, that Nala hadn't really believed her. Enems. Mwangi pulled a small device out of a bag she had with her and held it out to Nala. This is a combination communication device and data port. It will work anywhere on the ship. This seems like a good time to give it to you. It has several applications of interest that Mark can show you. For now, she said, pointing to a symbol on the screen. This one is a translator between Reladi and several human languages and, moving her finger slightly. This one is a tool specifically designed to help teach you English or any of the other languages I mentioned. Back in her room, Nala added to her notes. My first word in English, eclectic. If there is more than one way to do something, humans will do it more than one way, even things as basic as eating, speaking, or writing. Trying to characterize or even categorize humans was starting to look like a very daunting task. Thinking about the 3 humans at her table, they didn't even look like each other. The wide variation in skin, hair, and even eyes was a taxonomist's nightmare. The language tool that Ms. Mwangi had provided her with turned out to be structured as a sort of game. Nala found herself spending much of the following tens of days in her cabin or in one of the lounges playing it, and her English was improving dramatically. As a side effect, other members of the crew started talking to her, which helped improve her English even more. 40 days into the journey, she was somewhat conversant and could read at an elementary level. She could even read the plaque on the corridor side of the door to her suite, the plaque that said, Professor Nala, Zoologist. That stopped her. Had Nalditch told them that she was a professor of zoology? She must have. Maybe Mark talked about being a biologist as a way to befriend her. She was starting to really like him, but at the back of her mind, she was still bothered by the arboreal species lie and could not shake the feeling that all of the humans were lying about a few other things as well. The language learning tool was designed to teach many human languages, not 6,000 of them for sure, but maybe 100 of the most commonly used. More out of curiosity than anything else, Nala dipped into the courses for each of the other 5 languages that Ms. Mwangi had mentioned. Nala had never thought about there even existing multiple languages before, and she found the differences and similarities fascinating. With help from Ms. Mwangi, Nala located various crew members that spoke Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic or Russian. Ms. Mwangi herself spoke Swahili and Russian as well as English, and was pleasantly surprised that most of them, also rather bored with the tedium of the transit, were more than happy to help her practice. Since English was more important on this particular human ship, she became much more proficient at it, but still she was able to read the child-level character set for Mandarin and at least sound out the phonetic languages, even if she didn't know what she was saying. At some level, Nala, the zoologist, wondered if this exposure to the possibilities of variance would help her see aspects of her animal subjects in a new light. Rust! Over time, Nala found that language was more than just specific words and grammar. On several occasions, the video she was watching or the person she was talking to would use a phrase that seemed to be out of context or even totally nonsensical. When she asked Mark about these phrases, he explained that they were idioms, phrases that culturally had a meaning different than what the literal meaning of the words would imply. Mark then showed her another application on her data port. This application, which Mark called a wiki, provided a searchable interface to the Kildeer's general knowledge data vault. The section of the wiki he showed her listed hundreds of human idioms, their meanings, and their origins. Each entry contained cross-reference links to relevant cultural articles, which in turn contained more links. Nala started by trying to understand the idioms that she had heard, but soon found the ubiquitous cross-linking was taking her far off topic. She couldn't believe how extensive the information in the data vault was, or understand why you would need to have that much information at your fingertips on a freighter. She did not have the context to understand most of what she was reading, but after a few hours of exploring this new application, she thought she understood at least one idiom. She had learned what a rabbit hole was and what it meant to go down one. The next few days blurred together as she spent hours following random threads in the wiki, trying to learn more about humans. For example, she learned that their homeworld is called Earth in English, and being humans, an endless list of other things in other human languages, including Terra, Tierra, Dikyu, Alad, and Zemlia, to name but a few. She also read that its rotational axis is tipped a whopping 0.4 radians from its orbital axis, and that 70% of the surface is covered with undrinkable salt water. The first fact means that most of the surface of the planet experiences extreme annual variations in temperature, which, when coupled with the second fact, means that much of the planet is subjected to massive storms. In addition, the Earth has a single natural satellite so huge that its gravity causes all that water to slosh up to several meters every day in a phenomenon the humans call tides. As if that weren't enough, Earth has a ridiculously thin crust over its semi-fluid mantle, making the entire surface vulnerable to volcanic eruptions and sudden, strong ground shaking. Nala was stunned that life could exist on such a violent world, but when she looked into it, the opposite seemed to be true. On the stable world Rilladan, the best adapted species pushed out the others, resulting in limited biodiversity. But on Earth, with the environment in a state of constant change, every living thing from viruses to macrofauna was in a constant state of hyper-competitive adaptation. The diversity and lethality of the entire biosphere were terrifying, and humans were its apex species. As her English improved, access to the language also gave Nala access to the vast library of entertainment media on board, and she spent a lot of her free time reading and watching recorded shows to try to improve her abilities. But in the process, she was also inevitably learning more about human history and culture, and much of it was inconsistent with what she thought she understood and unsettling. Perhaps more than unsettling. It was astounding how much of human entertainment involved levels of violence Nala had never imagined, and the historical media was even more unsettling. Nala was more sure than ever that the humans were deliberately presenting a carefully crafted facade to the Reladi. But why? And why were they apparently letting her discover their little secret? Taking a break from studying humans, Nala picked up the data port and searched for killdeer. Killdeer, a ground-nesting insectivorous bird native to the Western Hemisphere of Earth. The article had pictures, discussions of eating and mating behavior, and much more. What it didn't have was any mention of this very ship. Nothing. Nala found that very strange, given how extensive and complete the wiki seemed to be. What about the killdeer would make the humans deliberately withhold that information? She tried Nightdew next and found there was an article about that freighter, including the picture she had seen back on Ranolog, the one showing the Nightdew with its nose caved in. The whole forward superstructure had been smashed, which would include the room she was currently sitting in, she thought. Then she realized what had bothered her when she saw the ship from the outside before boarding. The nose of the ship was covered with the exact same corrosion and pit marks as all the rest of the hull. The humans must have rebuilt the entire nose, but why, or for that matter how, did they rebuild it complete with all the corrosion and pockmarks? On a hunch, she grabbed a knife and white towel from the kitchen in the suite and went out into the hall. Nala bent over one of the ubiquitous rust patches and scraped it with the knife. Then she wiped it with the towel and looked carefully. No ochre smear of rust, but there were a few flakes of... She flipped them over. Paint. Okay, Nala, think. The humans had painted their ship inside and out to look old and rusty. Therefore, the ship was not already old and rusty. Therefore, this is a new ship and not the Nightdew. She slipped back into her room, dropped the knife and towel on a counter, and tried to get control of her breathing. The thought spun around in her head. This is a new ship. That's what is being suppressed from the wiki. Nala left her room and moved as quietly as she could to the galley. She looked at the menu, but most of the words she didn't understand. So she unobtrusively peeked in a disposal unit and then another. In the third unit, she saw a bone with a small amount of burnt meat still attached to it. She tried not to throw up or scream. Instead, badly shaken, she made the long walk forward past the cargo holds to her room in the bow. Once inside, she leaned against the closed door and cried. It confirmed what she had read in the wiki. Humans are not just fruit and leaf eaters. They are omnivores and they eat meat, including meat from big animals from what she saw. That Nalditch woman was right. Everything the Reladi think they know about this ship is a lie. Everything the Reladi think they know about humans is a lie. This is a ship of monsters. And now that Nala thought about it, way more of these monsters than it should take to operate a freighter of this size. Nala thought about the paper she had written about survival in the Rladen forest. Now she needed to think as if she were researching a new paper. How to survive on a human spaceship. As Nala started to think like a scientist about her situation, another concern began to coalesce. The humans were fabricating a facade for the Rladi, but it was a lie with a purpose. For some reason, the humans were self-aware enough to be very worried about the impression they were making. That thought reminded her that the killdeer itself is a lie, a facade. The humans went to great lengths to make a new human ship look like an old Rladi freighter. But the Rladi already knew of human ships, and that this ship at least had an all-human crew, so who is the facade for? Names. 53 days into the transit, Nala noticed a lot more of the crew were in the galley at the same time she was. Surreptitiously looking around, Nala observed they were no longer trying to hide their omnivorous diet. Somehow, word had gotten out that Nala knew. On one hand, it meant she was being watched. On the other hand, it meant the crew was much more comfortable around her, which made talking to them much easier. Nala thought she had talked at least once to all of the crew, and knew the majority of them by name. But as she read badges and learned names, she found that once again, any semblance of a pattern eluded her. Humans couldn't seem to do anything only one way. Today found Nala sitting at a small table in one of the recreation rooms with the captain, Mark, and Boomer, who was obviously an old friend of the captain. Nala had already observed that humans came in a broad range of fur, eye, and skin colors. But Boomer was special even for a human. It looked like his entire body was covered in symbols, designs, and pictures. Yes, definitely recognizable pictures. Nala's species, who were covered in a thin layer of fur, had never developed anything resembling tattooing, and so Nala was trying to figure out how evolution alone could produce a skin coloration like Boomer's. And then there was his name. Boomer, I hope this isn't rude, but I am confused about your name. Every badge has the crew member's role and 2 or more names, but what we call each other verbally doesn't seem to map in any consistent way to what is on the badge. The captain introduced you as Boomer, but your badge says David Mikera Nagata. The Maori replied, David is a very common name. There are at least 6 of us on board, so several of us prefer to go by nicknames to avoid confusion. I'm Boomer, and I know a David in engineering that goes by Grease, for example. Ah, said Nala, I get that. I was once in a class with another Nala. It was very confusing. But what about other names? She asked the table at large. The captain is called by his title captain, not Joe or Nguyen. Mark doesn't go by his title biologist, but some people call him Dr. Ruthgar. Ms. Mwangi is rarely called Specialist Mwangi and never Almasi, except by you, Captain. Captain Nguyen said, calling someone by their title, Captain, Doctor, or Ambassador, for example, is a formal salutation showing respect, while calling someone by their given name, like Mark, is showing friendship. Generally, you use formal salutations for someone in a rank position higher than yours or someone you don't know very well, but you use their given name or nickname if you are in a peer relationship with them, such as family or friends. Calling someone by a gender title and their relational name, such as Ms. Mwangi, is kind of in between those 2 extremes. I'm one of the very few people on board that gets to call Ms. Mwangi by her given name Almasi, because we have been friends a long time. Okay. Human addressing conventions were more complex than Nala initially thought, involving status, relationship, and familiarity. What's a relational name? She asked. Mark took a stab at that one. A relational name identifies a group you are a part of. For most people, that is your family. In some cultures, however, people will use the name of the community they come from. At least one culture derives a child's relational name from the given names of the parents. Let me construct an example. In that culture, if the captain and Ms. Mwangi formed a family, then their sons would have the relational name Josephson and their daughters would have the relational name Almasidote. Josen, corrected the captain. My legally given name is Joe, not Joseph. My parents didn't like contractions. Once again, if there is more than one way to do it, humans will do it more than one way, thought Nala. She thought about it and said, My mother died when I was young, but I would have liked to have been named after my father. If I get to pick my own relational name, I think I would pick Gnolda daughter. Boomer laughed, but the captain and Mark were strangely quiet. Nolda, murmured Mark. Nala, is your father on Reladen? Nala replied sadly, No. He was a sensor operator and his ship went missing about 5 years ago. The captain and Mark looked at each other, and Nala thought they didn't look healthy. Do you know the name of his ship? Asked the captain. Dawnflower, said Nala. Nala, Boomer, please excuse us. Mark, follow me, ordered the captain. Nala watched the captain and Mark hurry away and wondered what just happened. Nala excused herself from Boomer and went back to her cabin. Nala was idly playing with the language game when there was a brisk knock on her door. Hoping it was Mark, she hurried to answer it and fell back when she found herself facing Captain Guyon instead. After a brief pause, Captain Guyon handed her a well-worn and rather thick binder. Nala, this is going to be difficult for you, and I can't tell you how sorry I am, how sorry we all are, but I want you to try to read this report. All of it. I think it will clear up some questions you have. When you are ready to talk about it, I or Mark or Almasi, Ms. Mwangi, will make time for you. Let us know, and I will need that binder back. And with that, he stepped away and headed aft toward the bridge. Nala looked at the binder in her hands. Top secret compartmentalized methods and lessons learned from the Dawnflower investigation. The next morning found Nala still sitting on her couch, the binder on the small table in front of her, her mind lost in memories of her father juxtaposed with what she had just read. Captain Joe Nguyen had killed her father and her unborn sister. Unintentionally, yes, but her father was still dead. Boomer had found her father on the Dawnflower with his robot. Dr. Mark Ruthgar was the lead researcher that had dissected the bodies, checked for pathogens that could harm humans, and developed a way to protect Reladi from human pathogens. Information specialist Almasi Mwangi led the team that translated the data recovered from the Dawnflower, including learning the names of the crew and identifying where they were from. The team that cracked the Reladi language itself did not seem to be represented among the crew of the Killdeer. Nala's ruminations were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. She didn't want to deal with those monsters right now and ignored it. Sometime later, there was another knock and she ignored that too. Finally, late in the day, there was another knock, and then the lock opened, and Specialist Almasi Mwangi quietly let herself in and sat down near Nala. After a silent pause, Almasi reached over and gently covered Nala's hand with her own. Nala looked at it for a bit before turning her own hand over to grasp back. Nala said, as if to herself, I was going to have a little sister. After a pause, she continued, If the monsters in my nightmares have nightmares of their own, then the monsters they dream of must surely be humans. I could never in my wildest fears imagine that beings such as you exist. Being so scary, you literally scared my father and his shipmates to death. Being so dangerous that you have to go to great lengths to not accidentally kill those you encounter. With that, Nala fell into Almasi's shoulder and began to softly cry. Almasi wrapped Nala in a warm embrace, and they sat like that for a long time. Almasi said, "Until your father died, we did not understand how others would see us. When we planned how to introduce ourselves on Runolog, we went to great lengths to try to not be so terrifying, and still it almost ended in disaster. I am very glad you are with us, Nala, and I hope you can learn to accept us. I think we need you. We need you to teach us how to be not so scary." "I don't know," said Nala. "I just don't know." Career moves. 56 days into the transit, Nala was out of her room and trying her best to come to grips with her life among the monsters. She could not reconcile the vast contradiction between how conceptually different and scary humans as a whole were, and how nice everyone on this ship was. How can she like the very people that killed her father and sister? But she did like them, and at some level, she felt guilty about liking them. Just being around humans for any length of time can really mess with your head, she thought. Finally, Nala went in search of Captain Nguyen, eventually finding him in his stateroom. "Captain, if you have a minute." "Of course, Nala." The captain smiled at her and motioned her in. This was the first time Nala got to see inside any of the other personal spaces, and Captain Nguyen's cabin was nice even in comparison to the captain's quarters she had seen on Reladi ships. The captain had a taste and a flair for composition that even Nala could appreciate. But perhaps most surprisingly, in amongst very comfortable sitting accommodations for humans was a single very comfortable Reladi chair, which she strongly suspected he had brought out of somewhere just for her. There's feeling special, and then there's feeling uncomfortably special. Nala tried to organize her words. "I appreciate finally knowing what happened to the Dawnflower and my father. Thank you. You and Mark and Ms. Mwangi, and honestly the whole crew have made me feel like I belong here. And that alarms me." The captain hesitated before responding. "I am glad that you are feeling better and are willing to be out and about with us. And it is helping me after all these years to be able to say I'm sorry to Nolda's daughter. I think he would be very proud of the person you have become. Now why are you alarmed?" Nala launched into it. "Humans have coordinated a very carefully crafted facade for the Ladi. But the entire time I have been on this ship, you and the crew have been deliberately revealing to me more and more information about who you really are, culminating in that report about the Dawnflower. With all I know, it would be illogical for you to allow me to inform other Reladi and ruin your facade. I don't believe you're ever going to let me off this ship. But if you were going to kill me, that would have happened long ago. So why am I here? I can't figure it out. And what happens when this ship gets to Reladan?" Another brief pause, and Captain Nguyen said, "Let me call in Almasi and Mark," leaving Nala fearing what the captain might spring on her this time. Mark and Ms. Mwangi joined them after just a few long minutes. Captain Nguyen brought them up to speed on the conversation so far, and then asked Almasi to provide Nala with a little background. Ms. Mwangi opened a file on her data port and began speaking. "As the head of security, it is my job to keep people from going where they are not supposed to go, both physically and from an information standpoint. But this works both ways. It is also my job to go where others don't necessarily want me to go, especially from an information standpoint. Our trade delegation on Arnolog discovered that your people have established a connectionless digital information network, what we would call an internet, that you use for virtually all communications. So Nala knew that, of course, and we also discovered that your sense of network security is, well, to put it bluntly, terrible. I don't know how to say this gently, so let me just spell it out for you," continued the captain. "Director Naldich didn't want us going to Reladan, so she created the requirement that we take on a Reladi representative, under the assumption that we wouldn't want any Reladi on our ship. When we accepted her terms, it put her into a bind. She didn't actually have a representative in mind. So we helped her, inserted Almasi. Nala felt her skin crawl. Define helped her. Almasi looked at her hands and said, I spotted your research notes on Arnolog forest creatures and comparing research styles concluded that Nasha on Arnolog and Nala 2 years earlier on Arladan were the same person. I read your research papers and was quite impressed, jumped in Mark, trying to calm Nala down and failing horribly. Anyway, continued Almasi, we faked orders from Arladan to Nalich to get her to pick you as her representative. Nala was really having trouble comprehending that what Ms. Mwangi had just said was even possible. No Ladi was likely to ever come up with a scheme so evil. So you're telling me that you picked me for this, that you kidnapped me, that you misled a high-ranking government official into kidnapping me for you? Because I am a zoologist. What do you need a zoologist for anyway? I just don't know what to think anymore. This is what comes after insane. Well, said Captain Nguyen, it's not just that you are a zoologist. It also helps that the Ladiseda syndicate and some guy named Nissel seem very interested in having you dead. What? Yes, said Captain Nguyen. If you were to get off this ship on Raladan, you would certainly be dead within the day. We're hoping that bit of information will make you less upset when I tell you that we're not going to Raladan. What? Nala's brain was starting to seize up in shock, and she was running out of words. You asked why we need a zoologist. Mark will show you our lab, said the captain. But first, I would like to hear why these people want you dead so badly that they would reach out to the colony worlds to find you. Nala looked around at the 3 humans. Given that clearly none of them were in the habit of telling all that they knew, there could be no point in lying. Nala told them all she could remember about Gnissel and how she had managed to flee to Runolog. After a pause, Captain Nguyen pulled up some documents on his data port. Nala, we offer you permanent sanctuary on this ship. Sign these forms and you become a paid member of the crew. Almasi, will you please authorize Nala's badge for cargo hold 3? The door to Nala's stateroom had said, Professor Nala, zoologist, when she first came on board. These monsters had this planned the whole time, Nala thought. She was going to have to study human expletives. Vladi expletives just didn't scale far enough. Later, Nala and Mark went down to cargo hold 3, and Mark had Nala verify that her badge and pick would open both doors. She knew from her past travels that ships like this had toroidal cargo holds that wrapped around the central passageway, so she was not surprised that each cargo hold had 2 doors, one on each side of the passageway. But when she went inside cargo hold 3, either door led her to a caged gangway running parallel to the central passage, and the entire hold outside of these gangways was completely packed with crates and pallets, such that she couldn't even see past the first layer in any direction. Mark smiled at her confusion and led her a short distance down the gangway to where a large, nondescript grey machine, similar to a commercial air conditioning unit, was pressed hard against the gangway cage. Mark reached into where a small keypad made up part of a control panel and entered his pick. Nala startled when, with a click, a chunk of the cargo and gangway cage bars swung in, providing entry to the huge space beyond. Well, the rust is fake. Why wouldn't the cargo be fake too? Nala commented, so this is a camouflaged wall to hide these rooms from the Reladi port inspectors? That's right, smiled Mark. Am I correct, said Nala, in assuming there is no actual cargo in any of the holds on this ship? Correct, said Mark, but I only have access to this one. Inside, Nala found herself looking at a laboratory any research hospital would be proud of. The machines were slightly different. and the controls were meant for human hands. But there could be no doubt this was the lair of a biologist. "Huh?" said Nala. "You've been holding out on me?" As she looked around, however, she became puzzled. This half of the cargo hold 3 toroid was divided into several rooms with different purposes, and the cabinets contained plenty of chemicals, but there were no biological samples. This lab was ready for use but had never been used. Nala was trembling as she worked her way through the maze of rooms of the biology lab to the other half of the toroid. This day cannot get stranger, she thought. Okay, yes, it can, she told herself, as she stepped into the best-equipped zoological research facility she had ever seen. One section contained glass-sided cages, sized for everything from small animals to one capable of containing multiple reladi. The thought had her shuddering again. The rest contained veterinary facilities, an office, and spaces characteristic of the best animal labs. Looking around, everything looked so normal that it took Nala a while to realize she recognized all of the equipment. They were identical to the equipment that she had used back on Erladan, equipment designed to be used by hands with 2 opposable thumbs. Her hands. She started to tear up. The humans, all the humans, had worked together to build an entire lab just for her. But again, it was all clean and new. No specimens. "Mark, what are these labs for? We're nearly halfway to Rilladan. The only thing we're likely to find out here is, oh shit. Are we really?" "Yes," drawled out Mark, now grinning widely. Nala didn't know if she was terrified or thrilled. Apparently, it had not been an exaggeration when she said humans were the nightmares of her nightmares. Nala and Mark spent several days in Cargo Hold 3, familiarizing themselves with the layout, equipment, and available supplies. Mark could talk endlessly about the biolab side of the toroid, while Nala got to return the favor on the zoological side. However, there was one aspect of the zoological side that neither of them expected. One day, Ms. Mwangi accompanied them to Cargo Hold 3 and introduced them to baby talk. She explained that on Earth there were actually several self-aware and social species, and it was long assumed that members of a social group communicated with each other. But try as they might, no human had cracked the enigma enough to communicate with a different species effectively in its own language. Embarrassingly, several species, including dogs, gorillas, and macaws, appeared to understand human language rather well, raising questions about relative intelligence. So humans tried a different approach. They attempted to create an artificial intelligence that mimicked the way children process their parents' sounds and behaviors to learn language. An early prototype produced results with dolphins, so the humans expanded the range of inputs to include not just sounds, body language, and actions, but also heat signatures, pheromones, electromagnetic radiations, and pretty much any measurable emissions or states that an organism might produce. While this didn't exactly allow humans to talk with just anything, it did produce results in identifying exactly what constituted the communicative emissions, intentional or subconscious, of several different species. The newest generation of this AI, now called Baby Talk, was integrated into an impressive range of sensors trained on the largest of the zoological specimen cages in Nala's lab. Baby Talk had never been tried on a non-Earth species, but Ms. Mwangi was very excited about the possibilities. Discretion. 62 days into the transit, Nala was in Recreation Room 3 talking with Boomer and his friend Ivan Melnick. She was coming to grips with the idea that the killdeer was not really a freighter at all, but rather was out here hunting despoilers. "Ivan," she asked, "your badge identifies you as a weapon master. When I crewed on a bull once, the weapon master was responsible for the repulsion turret." But the killdeer doesn't have any weapons. I assure you the despoilers have weapons, so how exactly do we not all get killed? Ivan laughed and Boomer said, "Oh boy, now you've got him started," and downed the last of his drink in resignation. Ivan laughed again and said, "Drink up, Nala, it's tour time." Cargo hold 2 had the customary 2 doors opening from the central passageway onto caged gangways, holding back a wall of crates and pallets, so it was no surprise when Ivan opened the hidden door to the hold beyond. Inside the toroidal cargo hold, there were 3 retractable weapons turrets, 120 degrees apart from each other. In this configuration, they would cover all the way around the sides of the ship with overlapping fire, and all 3 could shoot forward. Nala commented, "I don't know anything about weapons, but I understand geometry just fine. The fact that these are mounted forward of the bridge leaves little doubt about who you humans expect to be doing the chasing and who will be the chased. Despoiler ships are small and fast. What happens if one gets behind us?" she asked. Ivan thought, damn, she's starting to think like a human. The bloody didn't even imagine making a ship specifically for combat or even convoy protection. He replied, "Humans prefer ships with much longer range than the Reladi freighters are capable of, so human ships need to carry much more reactant mass." Another thing we had to hide from the port inspectors was that we moved the engine reactant storage from the aft structure into the entirety of Cargo Bay 4. Having moved the reactant, now we could place 2 more retractable turrets covering the back hemisphere. Nala pondered the excessive firepower on display around her. Human ships trade at Runolog all the time. Are they all heavily armed? "Definitely," said Ivan. "Humans don't go anywhere without packing heat." "So are they always hidden on every human ship?" Nala asked. "No, only on ships that we think are at risk of coming into contact with sentient non-humans," replied Boomer. "After Dawnflower, we decided to never show weapons unless we are firing them. We don't want to accidentally make a bad impression again." "Well, as a Reladi, I find it disconcerting to think that we are surrounded by 40 essentially unarmed Reladi freighters, the crews of which have no idea that the rust bucket in their midst is heavily armed and staffed by a horde of psychotically duplicitous monsters." Boomer smiled and put his thick arm around her. "Don't worry, little one. We adore you and won't eat your friends." Nala wasn't sure that phrasing was all that comforting. Broken Wing. The herd had been in transit for 76 days, which meant they were just over halfway to Rilladan. The tedium of spaceflight meant that most people were doing their jobs by rote and spending more and more time in the recreation rooms. Ms. Mwangi and Nala were chatting in an alcove by themselves and, as the conversation wandered, Ms. Mwangi invited Nala to start calling her by her given name, Almasi, which meant diamonds in Swahili. Nala knew that such informality was rare for the intense dark woman and was hugely honored. "Almasi, may I ask a question?" started Nala. Almasi raised an eyebrow and Nala continued, "What's really in Cargo Hold 1? Almasi was in the process of inviting Nala to come see for herself when an alarm rang through the ship and yellow light panels lit up around the room and down the hall. "That's the general quarters alarm, Nala," said Almasi, getting up quickly. "Follow me to the bridge." Nala noticed that, for the first time since she boarded the killdeer, everybody seemed to be moving at once, and quickly. As they entered the bridge, Almasi shepherded Nala to a seat to the left against the back wall, one of a row of identical seats with wide straps hanging between them. Nala had never used a 5-point restraint system before, so Almasi showed her how to adjust her head and armrests, and then buckle the harness snugly. "The ride might get a little rough," said Mark, who was strapping himself in on her left, while Almasi strapped in on her right, next to the door they came in. In the background, as they got situated, Nala caught glimpses of the familiar Aladi-designed freighter bridge, doubling in size as rusty metal bulkheads revealed themselves to be giant sliding doors, exposing many more consoles. New, complex, and definitely not of Aladi design. People were still taking their seats at these consoles as Captain Nguyen took his seat on the center dais and looked at the large screens that had appeared on either side of the forward view projection. Nala couldn't tell what the screen on the right was showing. It was just a jumble of graphs and data to her. But the screen on the left showed a three-dimensional view of the relative locations of every ship in the herd, annotated with their motion vectors, names, and other information. The three bulls were identified with blue circles around them. Far to the right, and down a little, were two other icons in red, labeled Bogey 1 and Bogey 2. "Tactical report," said the captain, and the room instantly became quiet. A woman near the front said, "We have two despoilers inbound on intercept." Phlox was the first to detect them and sounded the alarm. A ship icon brightened briefly on the herd view. "On average, the herd has accelerated 10%, and we are keeping pace to hold our position. However, the herd is starting to reorganize. The more capable ships are accelerating faster and are moving toward the front of the herd. One bull, the Nettle, is repositioning to the right side of the herd." Another icon brightened to highlight the Nettle. "Very well," said the captain. He watched the screen in disapproval as the formation stretched out, leaving the slower ships even more vulnerable. "Helm, move us softly toward the right rear of the herd, but don't crowd Nettle. Engineering, load a level 2 invitation and get ready to drag a wing. Tactical, shout out if it looks like the despoilers have picked a target. Sensors, watch for ships showing distress." Nala watched as the herd display showed the killdeer dropping back and moving right relative to the now stampeding herd of Relady freighters. A normal course of action was to try to run from the despoilers, not position yourself between them and the herd. Then she noticed that Ivan had taken a seat at one of the new consoles and reminded herself that the killdeer wasn't exactly defenseless. Still, she could feel her heart rate speeding up. This was, after all, exactly how her most frequent nightmare started. The chase went on for a couple of hours, while the herd stretched out, fast ships pulling ahead and slow ships falling further and further behind. Killdeer was now firmly back with the slow ships, while Nettle held position adjacent to the middle of the spread. The despoilers, Bogey 1 and Bogey 2, were getting uncomfortably close and continuing to catch up. Suddenly, Sensors and Tactical called out almost simultaneously. Sensors said, "Night Mist is losing power," as Tactical said, "Bogey's vectoring on Night Mist." Captain Nguyen, almost shouting, said, "Engineering, showtime. Helm, drift us to the right, a little behind Night Mist, and then bring us to 90 left and 10 down. Keep it unlovely and erratic, but stay just out of range of our guests." Suddenly, there was a loud but muffled boom from somewhere aft, and the killdeer shook violently. Nala grabbed her armrests tightly and watched in horror as the forward view screen showed the stars starting to slide to the left and up as the shaking subsided into the rhythmic pulse characteristic of a failing FTL drive. "I bet they saw that," someone said. The herd appeared to be pulling ahead faster as the killdeer slowed down, and soon the back end of the Night Mist passed in front just over 2 kilometers ahead. In the background, Nala heard someone say something about a reactant and debris plume and a 2% reactant fluctuation in their wake. Tactical reported that the despoilers had shifted their predicted intercept from the Night Mist to the killdeer. The stars in the forward view shifted back to the right as the killdeer turned away from the herd and started its run into the empty void, Bogey 1 and Bogey 2 hot on its tail. Specialist Almasi Mwangi looked to her left and saw Nala rigid with terror, her eyes fixed on the big tactical display. Almasi put her hand over Nala's hand and said, "Nala, Nala, look at me, focus on me." Nala turned to look at Almasi, but was having trouble focusing. "Nala, focus on my voice. Who are you?" Nala paused and said hollowly, "I am Nala, daughter of Nolda." "Good, stay with me. Where are you now?" said Almasi intensely. "On the Killdeer." Almasi smiled at her. "Good. Did you look up Killdeer on the wiki?" Nala looked puzzled at this line of questioning and was starting to come out of her fear-induced trance. "Yes, it's a bird on Earth." "Tell me about it. Tell me about its behavior," said Almasi, keeping Nala engaged. Nala had to think hard, and the FTL-induced pulsing was pulling at her attention. "It eats insects and seeds. It nests on the ground. When its nest is threatened, it will perform a distraction display." "What's a distraction display?" asked Almasi, still holding tightly to Nala's hand. Nala replied, "When it spots a predator close by, the killdeer parent will pretend it has a broken wing, calling loudly and limping along as it stretches out one wing and fans its tail. The predator, thinking it's spied an easy meal, zeroes in on the parent." Nala's eyes move to the tactical display and the rapidly receding herd, and leaves the nest alone. Almasi grinned broadly and gave Nala's hand a tight squeeze before letting go. "Welcome to the Killdeer, Nala." On the big tactical display, the last of the herd was almost off the screen. Nala was somehow pleased that Nettle had dropped back and was staying close to Nightmist at the very back. However, Bogey 1 and Bogey 2 were still in pursuit of the killdeer. Pursuing but not gaining, Nala noted. Then Nala looked over to where Ivan was carefully monitoring the loadout status of the retracted turrets, and next to him, one of Boomer's people was monitoring displays showing the preparation of the shuttles in the bay at the base of the central structure. Nala remembered that Boomer was the shuttle and ROV pilot that managed the boarding of the Dawnflower. When this was over, Nala realized she was never going to have those old nightmares again. Now grinning herself, Nala turned back to the big dark woman and said, "I'm sorry, Almasi. I'll have to pass on that tour of Cargo Hold 1. It looks like Mark and I are about to receive some new specimens." Zoology. The killdeer continued to lead the despoilers on a merry chase into the void for 6 hours, slowing and increasing their reactant bleed when it looked like the despoilers were losing interest and then speeding back up to stay a fixed distance in front of them. Finally, when they were well clear of the herd transit lanes and unlikely to be discovered, the killdeer made its move. Engineering dumped another large burst of plasma as a distraction, while simultaneously Helm brought the killdeer broadside to the pursuing ships. As the killdeer turned, Turret 2, on the side now away from the despoilers, emerged from its retracted position. When the killdeer rolled to bring that side of the ship toward the pursuers, the distance had closed, and they had no time to react to the massive collection of weapons now pointed their way. Nala was impressed. Ivan and his team certainly know their stuff. They used smaller, more surgical weapons to strip Bogey 1 of anything that looked like weapons, communications, or engines, while leaving the pressure hull intact. Simultaneously, a rather larger weapon gutted Bogey 2 from bow to stern, leaving no compartment unvented. It was performed so precisely that all 3 ships dropped out of FTL within just a few hundred kilometers of each other. A few hours later, one shuttle returned bodies from Bogey 2 to Mark's biolab, while another brought back live specimens from Bogey 1 for Nala's cages. The shuttle had a cage with its own docking collar at the back, which joined with the docking cage built into the lab. The shuttle crew expertly performed a biohazard-safe transfer from one cage to the other of 6 mostly uninjured creatures. Additionally, a couple of badly injured despoilers were locked into biohazard-safe surgical tanks for Mark and Nala to jointly try to help. No despoiler ship had ever been captured before, so no Reladi nor human had ever seen one of these creatures before. "Oh, wow," said Nala, shivering. "Those are truly hideous." Mark had to agree. Their basic body plan was a hairless endothermic plated vertebrate with 4 legs and a thick neck of sorts ending in something that looked sort of like the nose of a star-nosed mole. Except the tentacles were long enough to reach halfway back along their bodies. A mound above their shoulders carried stereo vision eyes facing forwards and 2 other eyes further back to give them full, wraparound vision. They wore dark grey clothing with multiple pockets which covered most of their, well, Mark called it a disturbing pattern of puke greens and piss yellows, skin. Nala's initial impression was not improved when, the next day, Mark told her to be careful because that star nose also contained a hidden venom fang that can shoot out about 10 centimeters. It took a while for the killdeer and its shuttles to maneuver the captured ships close together, simplifying the long process of investigating the killdeer's new acquisitions. Meanwhile, Shuttle 1, the comfortable one with long-range engines, was provisioned with a whole lot of food. Aboard it, 2 of Killdeer's crew started the 2-month journey back to Rinolog, where they were to find a human ship and report the Killdeer's current location and acquisitions. Captain Nguyen stressed the importance of not being detected by the Reladi, as he wanted them to continue to think that the Killdeer had been destroyed. The first order of business for Nala, with the help of the shuttle crews investigating the captured ships, was to figure out how to keep her new specimens alive for an extended period of time. That meant figuring out what the despoilers ate, how they ate it, and how they disposed of their waste products afterward. Mark, meanwhile, was focused on pathogen compatibility to make sure nothing was transmittable to either humans or Nala, and to make sure that nothing was transmitted back to the living despoilers. For the first 8 days, all of this was proving to be a significant challenge. But finally, they had fabricated a new cage with a working despoiler toilet and a simplified food and water delivery system. Is cage the right word? Thought Nala. These were more like aquariums without water, because they had to be biohazard-proof. The shuttle crews had brought back all the food they found and were rather pleased with themselves when they figured out which rooms contained despoiler toilets and how they worked. 14 days in, one of the injured despoilers died and Mark performed an autopsy on it. Well, she, actually. Mark had figured out that they reproduced sexually, possibly by egg-laying, as there appeared to be no internal structure supporting live birth. The other one, a male, they slowly nursed back to health. On the 19th day, the injured despoiler was healthy enough to move to his own cage within sight of the 6 other survivors. They all looked at each other, but there seemed not to be any attempt at communication that Nala could detect. There was no evidence Baby Talk was making any progress either. 25 days after its capture, Mark and Nala decided to move the recovered despoiler in with the group of 6, and were horrified when the other 6 descended on it, literally tore it apart and stuffed it into their version of a toilet. It took another few days for Mark, Nala, and a mechanic borrowed from engineering to fix the toilet, in part because of all of the complications associated with moving the creatures safely between cages. These were intelligently uncooperative creatures, and the situation was rife with hazards. It wasn't as if Mark was working only in the biology side of the lab and Nala in the zoology side. Most of the time they worked side by side in the same part of the lab, helping each other and exchanging ideas. All the years Nala had studied forest creatures, she had worked alone. This was the first time she experienced working directly with someone that understood and valued what she was doing and thinking. Nala was all too aware that she could never go home and may never see another laddie again for the rest of her life. The loneliness of the thought would have been overpowering if it weren't for the warmth of companionship, understanding and appreciation she was getting from Mark hour after hour while studying the despoilers. The irony was not lost on Nala that she was learning to accept and even like one of the creatures of her nightmares while studying another. Nala pondered the attack on into the night. The next morning she sat down with Mark. On Reladi, I observed Thrugs. These are small pack-bonded predators, I suspect rather like Earth's weasels. Thrugs, it turns out, are a real pain in the ass to study because if you touch a member of the pack and get your scent on it, the others will kill it. I don't know why. My best theory is that they fear it is somehow contaminated. Mark thought about it. Could be. On Earth, there is a hive insect called an ant, and there is a fungus that infects these ants. If the hive suspects an ant is infected, they will kill it and deposit its body far from the hive. This protects the hive. Okay, said Nala. Working theory, the despoilers have had no known social contact with other spacefaring species. Remember, they have never tried to talk to the Reladi, they just attack and kill us. What if they are so xenophobic that they think that any of them that has been isolated with us is contaminated? Well, for one thing, said Mark, that means they can never go home. An awkward moment passed before Mark said, Oh my God, Nala, that was so incredibly insensitive of me. I am so sorry. I try not to think about it, said Nala as she walked out of the room. Nala's emotional relationship with humans was improving, but apparently there was still a long way to go. Breakthrough, NSFW. Research aboard the killdeer slogged on. A huge amount of material was recovered from the captured vessels, but the killdeer was incapable of towing the vessels themselves back to human space, and Captain Nguyen was against leaving them until he heard something back from his superiors. So they sat and did what they could. Yes, they were learning a great deal about despoiler biology and technology, but one thing eluded them. They could not figure out how the despoilers communicated, much less make any progress on their language. It appeared that they were just sitting there for 6 whole months now. Gah! Nala was getting very frustrated. She was in her office looking through the window at the cage area and those 6 damn despoilers when Mark came in and stood beside her. The 6 surviving despoilers in their cage stared back. The problem with studying intelligent beings is that they understand what I am trying to do and actively refuse to cooperate. I'm just not making progress. Nala spoke her frustration and buried her head in Mark's shoulder. Mark put his arm around her and idly stroked the fur on her arm with the tips of his fingers. Wrapped up in their focus on the despoilers, neither Mark nor Nala had noticed how over these last few months the relationship between themselves had slowly evolved. But the despoilers noticed. Mark and Nala held the position for a few seconds before Mark said, Nala, are those displays supposed to do that? Nala lifted her head. Where? Oh, those biometric monitors are measuring electrical fields associated with brain and heart activity. The yellow indicates elevated levels of stress in our specimens. Rather more elevated than usual, actually. Nala pulled herself away from Mark to look closer. That's odd. Mark, I want to try something, and I want you to keep an eye on the top 2 traces. Tell me if they change. Mark was turning toward Nala and the monitors when suddenly she put her hand behind his neck, pulled herself to him, and locked lips in a tight, passionate kiss. As it turned out, She didn't need Mark to watch the monitors because they made a distinctive sound as the stress measurements red-lined. Nala pulled away with a grin on her face and looked at the traces and then at the despoilers. "Got you," she whispered. Mark looked very confused. What just happened? "Well," said Nala, "the despoilers are raging xenophobes who will kill one of their own if we touch them. But they know you and I are different species, and they are intelligent enough to empathize. So when I kissed you, they had an involuntary and visceral revulsion response. I know many Erladi would be revolted, and the involuntary response in the despoilers can be expected to be even stronger." But Mark was neither looking at nor thinking about the despoilers or the monitors. He was focused on Nala. "Nala, that's an interesting hypothesis, but we shouldn't rely on just one data point. I suggest we repeat the experiment." "That would be logical," said Nala as they repeated the experiment, with a little more tongue this time. As they pulled away, Mark said, "You and I are different species. More than a few humans would find this repugnant too, so I would be careful about how you report your findings." And yet he didn't let go of her. Nala, however, was looking at the monitors. "They're talking," she whispered. "If we can keep ramping up their abhorrence response, maybe we can record enough conversation to work with." Mark formed a roguish smile and looked about Nala's office. "We should give them a better view. Help me move this couch out into the cage room." Together, they slid the cumbersome furniture to a position in front of the cage. Then Mark pulled Nala to himself and kissed her again. In her peripheral vision, she noted it was working. Anxiety indicators were climbing to dangerous levels. Briefly, she wondered if the despoilers would stress out enough to injure themselves. That would be sweet, she thought. Nala loathed the creatures and had a lot of nightmares to pay back. Then Mark pulled back a little bit and started unfastening her clothes, and she forgot about her nightmares, even as the despoilers were gaining new ones. "Our anatomies are not an exact match," she said, "so we may have to experiment to find a way that works while keeping our voyeurs adequately engaged." An hour later, exhausted and covered in sweat, both hers and Mark's, Nala found herself again thinking, if there is more than one way to do something, then humans will do it more than one way. Mark noted the sweat covering himself and said, "Let's round up our clothes, make use of the decontamination shower in the biolab, and go get a bite to eat. The galley should be pretty empty this time of day." A pleasant shower and a short walk later, Mark and Nala were sitting at a small table in the galley. Mark had introduced her to a human food that was a stack of fried grain-based patties. Mark preferred his drowned-in-tree sap, but Nala found that stuff a little too sweet, so the duty cook served her patties with a thin layer of a paste made of mashed hazelnuts and cocoa beans that was absolutely divine. Their meal was only half complete when information specialist Almasi Mwangi flounced into the room and up to the side of their table with a mischievous energy that projected through the whole room. "Oh, pancakes! Good choice," she said, looking down at their plates. And then, with a sparkle in her eyes, she placed a hand on Mark's shoulder and her other on Nala's shoulder, leaned in close and said, "I suppose I should remind you too that all common areas of the ship are under constant audio and video surveillance by the security office. That's me, you know." Nala did not previously know that humans were able to change their skin coloration, but Mark had definitely turned a shade of red she had never seen before. He also looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. Almasi stepped back and laughed. "Don't worry. I encrypted that recording and moved it to my personal top-secret vault," emphasizing personal, in a way that sounded truly scandalous. Mark was trying desperately to figure out how to end this conversation when Captain Guyen strode into the room. "Almasi, you messaged that you had something important to tell me." Yes, Captain. I am super excited to tell you that through a truly creative breakthrough strategy, our favorite biologist and zoologist here collaborated to get our despoilers to start communicating with each other. Baby Talk has cracked the fundamentals, and now my team can start translating the records recovered from the captured ships. Baby Talk did? Asked Mark, his embarrassment momentarily forgotten. Yes, said Almasi. The moment you left the cage room, they started talking up a storm with massive amounts of body language. Baby Talk identified a combination of sounds and amplitude-modulated 1-meter radio waves. When you get back to your lab, I suggest you look into how those are generated. Captain Nguyen said, Well, that is really exciting news. Excellent work, you two. Then, looking at their pancakes, added, Almasi, shall we go to your lab and see where your team is at? And with that, a very happy information specialist and her captain walked out of the galley. As Mark and Nala watched them leave, Mark said as if to himself, That is a very dangerous woman. Then, turning to Nala, Would you like to join me in my stateroom? With the basic principles of the language cracked, a lot of progress was made in the next few months. The despoilers called themselves something that could not easily be represented in the rather limited English phonetic alphabet, especially the modulated radio components, but an approximation of just the oral components, minus the, for lack of a better description, guttural hisses, was umphaga, and a bulky and primitive umphaga English translation device was slowly being built up. The umphaga captives themselves were, predictably, shocked when the device was first turned on in their presence. The idea of other species, even spacefaring ones, being able to talk at all, apparently blew their fundamental worldview. They were truly as xenophobic as a species can be. But progress was made, and the device slowly improved. Crowded sky. The Killdeer and its 2 captured Umphaga spacecraft had been adrift for a little over 10 months when suddenly the sky got very crowded. Within hours of each other, ships representing the Anglo-Euro Union, the Asia Centauri People's Republic, the Gliesa Caliphate, the Union of Cyrillic Communities, and the Confederación Hispania showed up at the Killdeer site. Captain Nguyen was confused as to how this was even possible and wondered if the Bantu Republic would arrive soon. Over drinks, Captain Garcia of the CH Esfuerzo told the story to Captain Nguyen. The Dawnflower contained records about several systems along the transit corridor between Runolog and Ruladan, in addition to the systems that it had explored between Runolog and the point of its demise. These records included several planets that had rudimentary life, but were considered uncolonizable by the Ruladi, in part due to their lack of a stable environment and grass-like steppes. But at least one of these, GK 27.4, was perfectly colonizable by humans, who are far less picky about details like violent storms and drastic seasonal variations in temperature. But since the Dawnflower represented the first encounter with a non-human space-faring race, these records were a matter of public discourse. As a result, 5 of the 6 largest factions sent a colony expedition and supporting warships to protect their claims at roughly the same time, months after the Killdeer had left for Runolog. This resulted in GK 27.4 being an unlikely joint colony. Problems have been many, including a complete failure to agree on a better name, so the joint colony is still called GK 27.4, much to everybody's displeasure. That the current name is stupid seems to be the only thing the joint colony can agree on. As a result, when the Killdeer shuttle arrived at Runolog, all 5 factions had plenty of warships in orbit around GK 27.4 with which to respond. Just fabulous, said Captain Nguyen, "so the killdeer gets far more help than it wanted." "Tristemente cierto," agreed Captain Garcia. Every ranking officer, and as many others of the menagerie of ships as could manage it, visited the killdeer and found their way to cargo hold 3 to see the Umpfaga captives and the Ireladi zoologist caring for them. For most of the visitors, this was their first time seeing actual living, sentient extraterrestrials. Nala found it entertaining to read their badges and then greet them in their native languages before lapsing back to English for meaningful conversation. The visitors, for their part, were absolutely thrilled by this courtesy and by what they saw of the lab and the Umpfaga. The Umpfaga, for their part, were a good deal less thrilled. They could not figure out who all these aliens were, or why they used the language machine to keep asking the same inane questions over and over. Captain Nguyen, meanwhile, found himself hosting meeting after meeting in Recreation Room 4, which had been converted to a conference room for the purpose. High-ranking members from each faction were on hand to collectively decide how to establish a diplomatic relationship with the Umpfaga. The greatest stumbling block seemed to be that they couldn't even agree on a diplomatic relationship between themselves. Sometimes it seemed to Captain Nguyen that the killdeer might find itself in the center of a space war. It didn't help that, while each faction had allocated one ship that served as their liaison ship, each faction also had multiple warships in the distance providing security, including at least 2 battleships. This was a lot of firepower for an actual conflict, even more for what was supposed to be a diplomatic discussion. Captain Nguyen was desperate to calm things down and kept Almasi close at hand. Each delegate, of course, had their own ideas about what a favorable trade relationship would look like, along with other demands, but fortunately, a relationship with the Umpfaga would be so novel that there was considerable overlap. However, the organization of such a delegation was elusive. This was a meeting of high-ranking faction representatives, and Almasi Mwangi was supposed to keep quiet and observe, but she just couldn't stay quiet any longer. I was a part of the Bantu Republic's initial delegation to Ranulog and witnessed firsthand the turmoil brought to the Reladi peoples in that first half-year by having every faction operate separately. A unified species will not be expecting to deal with a divided one, and we risk causing the destructive first contact that we are trying so hard to avoid. I submit that it is paramount that we present the Umpfaga with just one delegation headed by just one ambassador. Dr. Abbas, representing the Gliesa Caliphate, nodded. Specialist Mwangi makes a valid point. We do not want to repeat the fiasco of Ranulog. I would be happy if our delegation consisted of a lead negotiator or ambassador, aided by a team consisting of a single representative from each faction. I think it is important that the faction representatives provide desires and advice to the ambassador, but the ambassador does all the talking to the Umpfaga. Finally, Captain Nguyen spoke up. The fundamental problem is that we need a lead negotiator who is neutral and can speak for all the human factions. It would be particularly helpful if said negotiator actually had experience with the Umpfaga and had some understanding of the way they view the universe. The killdeer happens to have such an individual. Almasi looked startled for a moment and then nodded her head. Representative Kuznetsov of the Union of Cyrillic Communities objected. Dr. Ruthgar is from the Anglo-Euro Union and cannot be trusted to be neutral. We will not accept him. Captain Garcia of the Confederación Hispania jumped in. I don't believe Captain Nguyen was speaking of Dr. Ruthgar. But while we can all agree that Professor Nala knows Umpfaga psychology better than anyone, she isn't human. That's the point, said Captain Nguyen. She understands the Umpfaga better than any of us, and because she isn't human, she views all humans equally, with no regard to faction. Representative Yang of the Ashikantari People's Republic said, "Professor Nala and I spoke in her lab. She is very congenial and smart, but how do we know she will negotiate for humans in good faith? Each faction will have their representative there to make sure that factions' interests are addressed," said Captain Nguyen. "All we are asking Professor Nala to do is arbitrate between the representatives of the factions to present a unified and unbiased slate." There was considerable discussion around the room, and Captain Nguyen was seeing that the representatives were warming to the idea. It solved a lot of problems. Then Representative Yang spoke up. "It is my understanding that the Umphaga are suspected of eating the Rladi they capture. Surely a young Rladi woman would be crazy to visit their home planet." "I can speak to that," said Almasi. "On Reladan, her peers considered Nala crazy for seeking out predators as part of her research. She left Reladan after angering a powerful oligarch in a very un-Rladi way. On the Killdeer, Nala has been working closely with humans for over a year, and certain attitudes have crossed over. I think it is fair to say that by Rladi standards she is, in fact, batshit crazy and much bolder than I expected. I'm confident she can be persuaded to accept this role if, in doing so, she has the opportunity to end the despoiler attacks on the Rladi herds." Representative Kuznetsov laughed. "So you're saying that, like the Killdeer itself, Professor Nala is Rladi on the outside and practically human on the inside. Interesting. I suggest everybody bring their proposed negotiator to the next session of this meeting. Captain Nguyen, please invite Professor Nala also to meet her team. I want to be present when you inform her of her new assignment. This should be most entertaining." Late in the evening, Captain Nguyen texted Nala, asking her to join him in the galley. When she got there, she found him sitting in a booth by himself, sipping a drink called bourbon, made of fermented and distilled grain. Nala had tried it. It wasn't bad. But that very nice Captain Garcia had introduced her to a variation made from a particular desert plant called agave, and that was her new favorite. She helped herself to a glass and joined the captain. Captain Nguyen could smell her drink as she approached the table. "Ah, Captain Garcia has made a new convert, I see." He then contemplated his own drink for a bit. "Have you met many of the members of the other factions?" "I don't know what you mean by faction, but I've met quite a few people from the other ships in passing," she replied carefully. "It seems like everybody wants to come to the lab and see the Umphaga. I've set up visiting hours to try to keep the captives' stress levels down, but I'm a little worried about them." "I thought you were not fond of them," said the captain. "Oh, I think they are hideous, both in appearance and attitude. But they are under my care," Nala said, swirling her drink. Another pause. "Nala, let me try to give you a big picture of who all these people are and why they are here." By the time the captain got done trying to explain, Nala badly needed another round of tequila. "So you're telling me," she said, "that there is more than one way to organize a government, there is more than one way to select who runs the government, and there is more than one economic model that can be implemented by that government, and that different groups of humans do all of them, and that's what factions are." "Yes. And these factions are constantly fighting with each other over whose system is the right system, or over interfaction trade, or over control of resources, or over, really, just about anything." "Yes. And we currently have 5 different fleets of heavily armed ships, like your Petrel, around us, and they could fight with each other at any moment. These are the nice people that have been parading through my lab?" "Well, most of the ships around us are considerably more heavily armed than the old Petrel, but they are really making an effort to not fight with each other right now," said Captain Nguyen. "They are here to arrange a joint expedition to go meet the Umphaga on their home world. Think about the problem. Each faction wants to bring its own warship, not to point weapons at the Umfaga, but to have the prestige of having that faction represented. But the Umfaga won't see it that way. They will just see a large fleet of heavily armed ships. Each faction will have its own representative to negotiate. But if the Umfaga make a deal with one faction, the other factions may not honor it. How are the Umfaga to make sense of this if they, like the Reladi, have always had a unified government and cannot comprehend a fractured species that is always at war with itself? Nala, the captain continued, you understand how the Reladi reacted to multiple human factions. Maybe you can talk sense into these people. The leaders are meeting again at 800 hours tomorrow in Rec Room 4 and would like you to be there. They recognize you as the foremost authority available on how the Umfaga think. Nala cringed. She actually was the foremost authority available, but that only meant that everyone else knew even less than her. She was so wrapped up in that thought that she forgot to consider that Captain Nguyen was probably withholding some key detail about this meeting from her. Again. Team building. At 800 hours, Nala arrived in Rec Room 4 and took her seat between Captain Nguyen and Almasi. Everyone had a placard on the table in front of them indicating their name, title, ship, and faction. Everyone but the members of the Anglo-Euro Union had placards in both English and their native language. Almasi whispered to her that English was generally the de facto common language for multi-faction meetings such as this. Nala noted that the placard in front of her said, Professor Nala, zoologist, Killdeer. Hers was the only placard in the room to not include a faction, and she wondered why it didn't at least say Reladi. But then she had a bad feeling that she wasn't here to represent the Reladi. When it looked like most everyone had arrived, Representative Yang of the Asia Centauri People's Republic, the chairwoman for the day, called the meeting to order and passed control to Captain Nguyen. Captain Nguyen introduced Professor Nala and reported that he had briefed Nala on the concept of factions and that he had invited her here to share her perspectives on how to negotiate with the Umfaga. He then concluded with the proposal that each faction's representative introduce themselves and their faction affiliation, and then introduce their choice to represent them on the negotiating team itself, and that the identified negotiations representative stand and remain standing. As chairwoman, Representative Yang went first, introducing her negotiator, Mr. Cho Sung-ho. Around the room, the other representatives introduced their negotiators, Mr. Dabir Nas, Professor Jimena de Leon, Dr. Arina Orlova, and Ms. Rose Franklin. Nala looked at the 2 men and 3 women standing up and looking back at her and wondered what exactly was expected of her now. Representative Kuznetsov, grinning like he was enjoying this way too much, nodded at the captain and then spoke directly to Nala. You see before you 5 negotiators representing 5 factions. They each have their wish list of what they want to get out of the coming trade meeting with the Umfaga rulers. But we don't think the Umfaga rulers will want to, or maybe not even comprehend that they need to, negotiate 5 contracts with 5 negotiators, particularly if there turn out to be conflicts between the contracts. Professor Nala, you are no doubt aware of the fiasco that occurred when only 4 factions landed on Runolog within a month of each other. As the local authority on the Umfaga, what do you suggest we do? Nala warily looked around and tried to dodge. That grin, and a similar one on Captain Nguyen, clued her to where this was heading. The logical choice would be to select one of the 5 to be the lead negotiator and negotiate a single integrated contract, she said. Won't work, jumped in Captain Garcia. Choosing a member of any one faction gives that faction prestige over the other factions. Then he smiled at her. Nala looked around the silent room and all eyes were on her. Once again she looked at the placards before she sighed resignedly. "Am I to understand that you want me, a Reladi, to head up a human delegation and arbitrate between all the factions while negotiating with the Umfaga? They have been attacking Reladi ships for years, and you are asking me to go to their homeworld, which presumably is infested with billions of the hideous venomous monsters?" "Nailed it," said Almasi, putting a hand on Nala's arm. "Don't worry, you'll have backup," said Captain Nguyen, swinging his arm around the room and, by extension, the 5 fleets around the killdeer. Nala slid her free hand down her face in a very human gesture of disbelief, and then asked, "Do we have anything resembling a plan?" Chairwoman Yang said, "That's the next order of business. Lead Ambassador Nala, we would like you to take your team," waving her hand at the 5 standing humans, "to the galley, have some drinks and get acquainted. The rest of us will spend the next couple of days developing a strategy for getting you and your team in and back out again." After Nala and the 5 members of her team left the room, Representative Yang said, "Wow, that went way easier than I expected." Captain Nguyen admitted that he might have a bit of a track record of inviting Nala to meetings where she was presented with shocking revelations, and she may have been expecting something like this. Captain Garcia contacted his ship and arranged to have the very best tequila in the galaxy transferred from his private stash to the killdeer exclusively for Nala, commenting, "She's going to need it." Nala spent the next several days with her team, getting to know them, showing them her lab, having drinks and dinners and more drinks, and getting a first look at what their proposals to the Umfaga might contain. She tried to imagine how a Reladi central government official would react to these proposals as a start to figuring out how to approach the coming negotiations. During this time, Captain Nguyen, with Almasi at his side, continued to participate in the discussions about how to best enter the Umfaga homeworld system and engage the xenophobic Umfaga leadership in discussions. After nearly a week, they had formulated a plan, more or less, and briefed the negotiations team. "Gunboat diplomacy," said Mark, as he and Nala lay curled up in his bed that night. "That sounds like something the Anglo-Euro Union would propose." "I don't know who proposed it first," replied Nala, "but I looked it up and I understand your reasoning. To be fair, though, it goes way back. Genghis Khan did something similar using land-based forces." Mark held Nala silently for a little bit, and then she continued, "After my discussion last night with the captain, I read a little more human history. You have a word that humans need and use an uncomfortable amount that I don't think would even occur to most unified species like the Reladi or the Umfaga: genocide. I really detest the Umfaga, but I was thinking about the fleets of warships the captain said will back me up, and gunboat diplomacy and all the talk." She looked up into Mark's eyes. "I don't think I'm going there to get the best contract for the humans. I think I am going there to prevent the Umfaga from doing something stupid and getting themselves killed." Setting the table. The records and star maps captured from the Umfaga raider ships showed a species that, other than some mining and the raiding of the Ladi transit herds, had progressed very little beyond their home system. The Umfaga had not established self-sustaining colonies, and apparently their ships had very limited range. There was some indication that they didn't have many ships either. The plan the humans came up with was simple, brutal, and almost certain to end in political and economic chaos for the highly feudal Umfaga culture. The combined human fleets would stealthily take up positions in the system's comet cloud, and then the killdeer would race through the center of the system like a lost and scared antelope through a pack of hyenas, and led as many Umfaga ships as possible back out to the waiting fleets. If the combined firepower of the Umfaga ships was sufficiently disproportionate to what awaited them at the edge of the system, every attempt would be made to disable the ships and take their crews alive. To this end, the human fleet was equipping itself with the necessary holding tanks for large numbers of prisoners. It was speculated that this approach would provide options in the final negotiations. Then, with the Umfaga defenses negated, the two big battleships would take up imposing positions above the planet and broadcast terms for negotiation on the Umfaga public frequencies to provide pressure while broadcasting more discreet invitations on certain limited government frequencies. This, Nala thought with incredulity, is the human idea of avoiding a destructive first contact. While the killdeer was playing scared antelope, Almasi took Nala with her into cargo hold 1. About half of it was an electronics lab, with bits of the original hunter ships from 6 months ago still scattered about on workbenches where they had undergone analysis. The other half, as Almasi gave Nala the tour, contained a large number of consoles and massive computing power, all connected to a dizzying array of sensors hidden throughout the killdeer's outer surface. Almasi explained that this was a signals intelligence center. From here, they could intercept communications, active sensors, and other emissions from the planet and the hunter ships. This allowed them to figure out how to isolate and jam transmissions, figure out who was talking to whom, and in some cases inject false information, either as communications or as false sensor returns, thus confusing the attacking force and disrupting their coordination. Nala had never conceived of anything like this, but on reflection could see how humans would. Snooping and lying seemed to be second nature to these creatures, and this was just an escalation of that behavior. Much to everyone's surprise, the plan actually worked largely per design. A hefty number of Umfaga crew were captured uninjured, and the head of one of the larger clans agreed to negotiate. Nala and her team, along with a hand-picked dozen bodyguards in full armor, took a shuttle to the negotiation site. Negotiations. The whole planet was in an uproar. A prey ship had been spotted entering the system. Reports at the time speculated that it was perhaps a scout, or perhaps just really lost. Whatever the reason, it stupidly headed right through the deep gravity well very near the planet itself. Virtually every prey hunter available throughout the system, about 120 of them, took after it, as it frantically climbed for the heliopause many hours away. The prey freighter looked old, unarmed, and on the verge of failure. Even in sublight, its engines were pulsing sporadically. Yet somehow, not a single hunter was able to get quite close enough. A few of the hunters had started from disadvantageous positions and were further behind than the others. They were the lucky ones. They managed to get brief messages out before their comlinks went dead. Planet-based detectors showed abnormal energy emissions across a broad swath of the comet cloud at the edge of the solar system, and then silence. After a while, the aging prey freighter cruised calmly back to orbit around the planet, this time accompanied by the two largest, most imposing spacecraft anybody had ever seen. Even a casual observer could see they sported weapons to match. Then broadcasts everywhere were preempted by the demand by these terrifying visitors that the Umfaga negotiate. The orthodox belief among the Umfaga was that they were the only intelligent species in the universe, and certainly top of the food chain. When the Ruladi ships, prey ships in the language of the Umfaga, were discovered many years earlier, Umfaga natural scientists went through quite the mental gyrations to explain how a non-sentient species could be spacefaring. So when the big ship showed up, the Umfaga were suddenly forced to face the idea that an alien intelligent species existed, had shown up in their space, spoke their language, and had bigger guns. It was too much. The very fabric of Umphaga theological and social structure was doomed. Kshiena, Droma of the Umplogos clan, long considered a heretic and a radical, at least by anybody reckless enough to challenge the powerful Umplogos clan, saw that a civil war was inevitable. To her, the question was how, once the dust settled, the Umplogos clan could come out on top. She desperately needed more information. So she took a daring gamble and answered the call. Droma Kshiena stood now at the edge of the landing site next to the agreed-upon negotiations chamber and watched an alien shuttle land on the Umphaga homeworld for the very first time in history. As she, a couple of attendants, and 20 security guards dressed as attendants but packing weapons hidden in their gowns watched the shuttle door open, there was no way to be truly ready for what stepped out. 8 bipedal figures covered in artificial armor so that no part of them was visible emerged and formed a crescent, probable weapons in hand. Then one of the prey animals that the hunters bring back stepped out. She was followed by 5. Something else. They were bipedal, but their eyes and movement marked them as probable predators. 2 of them were carrying a large box between them, and the others were carrying what looked like alien furniture. These were followed by 4 more of the armored creatures. Kshiena concluded that the prey animal was being offered as a gift and moved forward to accept her, saying, "I am Droma Kshiena, and I welcome our visitors from the stars." She was stopped in her tracks when the prey animal made sounds and what looked like a formal motion, and the box behind her said, "Greetings, Droma Kshiena. I am Ambassador Nala, and I speak for the humans around and above me. We look forward to finding a mutually satisfying path toward future trade and cultural exchange." Droma Kshiena's worldview was shaken. She didn't know what she was expecting of visitors from the stars, but a talking prey animal definitely wasn't it. And her not-so-subtle reference to the massive ships in orbit was not reassuring either. Droma Kshiena would need to avoid assumptions. "The meeting chamber is this way," she said, turning to enter the nearby building. In the designated chamber, Kshiena's staff had set up a table for her to place her data and recording devices, along with those of her assistant. Being quadrupeds, the Umphaga don't use chairs but either stand or lay down. Standing provided maneuverability and kept the eyes in a good position. Kshiena watched with interest as one of the unarmored humans unfolded an item it was carrying to form a quadrupedal piece of furniture and placed it on the other side of the table. The little morsel called Ambassador Nala folded her legs such that the furniture was supporting her rump, and Nala's eyes were now at level with Kshiena's. Behind Ambassador Nala, the humans set up a table they brought with them, and the 5 unarmored creatures sat on their own furniture. Kshiena was going to have to learn some new words for all this strangeness. Well, that seemed like as good a starting point as any for a conversation. The aliens and their shuttle returned to their ships above for the night after hours of conversation. Kshiena had learned what a chair was, that the 5 apparently unarmed beings were also ambassadors, which Kshiena interpreted to mean that they were secretaries to the little morsel that called herself Ambassador Nala. Kshiena had learned that the 12 heavily armored and armed creatures were also humans, but that those humans never sat down or lowered their guard for that matter. And perhaps most surprisingly, Kshiena had learned that, despite appearances, all of the humans were the same species, and their ancestors came from the same homeworld, while the little morsel was a Reladi, and had only met the humans recently herself. The humans had brought some gifts. Most notably, they brought a couple of Umphaga-style gowns made of an unknown material. They were soft, flowed well, and were scandalously bright colors. Xiene would never wear such things in public, but she just might show them off to her mate. The concerning thing was that they were Umfaga style. Xiene didn't rise to Droma by being a fool. Those gowns showed that the humans knew a lot more about the Umfaga than the Umfaga knew about humans. She wondered which of the Umfaga hunters that occasionally went missing over the years had ended up in the hands, they called them, of the humans. The next few days followed pretty much the same pattern. Nala presented some of the proposals from the humans, but Droma Xiene equivocated while trying to learn more about the humans. It was frustrating and slow. Finally, Droma Xiene asked for a 5-day pause so that she could confer with the other leaders. In reality, she had no intention of bringing any other leaders into these discussions. She desperately needed to confer with her advisors about strategy and to get her clan armed and stockpiling against the coming chaos. She, along with every other Droma, had lost her precious few hunter spacecraft to the humans, so the coming conflict was likely to be fought on the ground. In orbit, the humans were monitoring transmissions across the planet and trying to glean what they could about Umfaga society and political structure. It was becoming clear that politically the Umfaga were somewhere between humans and Raladi. They had a homogeneous population and a single common language like the Raladi, but multiple factions like the humans. There was no one-world government. Rather, their homeworld was divided into apparently slightly overlapping regions, each ruled by a Droma. It was also clear that the entire planet was about to erupt into civil war, but the humans had no idea why. Nala was in her quarters with Mark trying to enjoy some alone time, but her mind was on the negotiations. "I'm a zoologist, not a diplomat. I don't understand the Umfaga. Now it appears they are on the brink of worldwide violent social chaos, and I fear they will try to drag the humans into it. That will not end well." She buried her head into his neck. Mark asked her, "Have you tried talking to them?" Nala shook her head. "Who? The ambassadors from the factions. We talk all the time. They are at a loss too." Mark stroked her shoulder. "No, the Umfaga, the ones in our lab. They have a vested interest in this situation and may have some ideas." The next day, Nala rounded up her team, and the 6 of them, Nala and the 5 human ambassadors, went to Cargo Hold 3 with data units, recordings, and giant monitors to talk to the Umfaga captives. The ambassadors explained that the ship was currently orbiting the Umfaga homeworld, and they explained as best they could what the situation was, including showing video of the capture of the hunter ships and the many holding cells of captured Umfaga crew spread out across the ships of the human combined fleet. They even showed the captives some of the conversations with Droma Xiene. The captives had been in the cell for months and had no idea that they were now orbiting their own planet. The shock was immeasurable, but their responses did start to explain why the world beneath them was descending into chaos. Perhaps just as significantly, partway through the emotional firestorm of the day, Nala realized with some shame and self-awareness that although these people had been in her lab for months, her loathing had been so great that she had never bothered to learn their names. The team met again with the captives over the next 2 days and started showing them intercepted news transmissions and soliciting their analysis of what it all meant. This particular crew answered to a different Droma, but at heart they were all Umfaga and did not want to see their home destroyed. As these sessions wore on and the team began to internalize just what the real social and political situation on the ground was, the human ambassadors started going back to their factions and talking to those captives as well as to the human leaders. With clarity setting in, on the 4th day of the pause in negotiations, Nala urgently asked Representative Kuznetsov to convene the Council of Leaders. Nala looked around the room of now familiar faces and started her presentation. We currently have in our possession 1,181 Umfaga prisoners, 575 males and 606 females taken from 121 hunter ships. That includes the 6 prisoners in my possession. Months ago we had a 7th prisoner that was injured. We treated him and tried to put him into the cage with the other 6. Ms. Mwangi, please show the security footage. After the footage played and the assemblage had a moment to get over their revulsion, Nala continued, "This is not an aberration. The Umfaga are deeply xenophobic, and to be operated on by an alien species, or indeed to even be captured and held by one, makes an individual irrecoverably unclean. Even as we orbit their homeworld, our guests cannot go home. They will be killed. I suggest to this council that the Umfaga in our cells are no longer prisoners of war, but rather refugees. What are we to do with them?" There was a long pause, and then an even longer period of urgent murmuring among the assembled humans. Everybody had their data pads out, and messages were flying between the ships of the combined fleet. Suddenly, Captain Wilson of the Anglo-Euro Union and Representative Yang of the Asia Centauri, People's Republic, asked for recognition at the same time. In the ensuing silence, Representative Yang laughed and said, "Captain Wilson, I believe your family history makes you more qualified to present this option." Captain Wilson squinted across the room at Representative Yang in recognition of the teasing and then addressed the room. "Well, the Sheila from the YRG and me got to thinking we could drop 'em off out whoop-whoop. We're thinking with a bit of hard yakka maybe GK 10.2 from the Dawnflower survey would make a nice new strier for our mates." There was a pause in which the assemblage processed Captain Wilson's unique take on the language, undoubtedly exaggerated just to irritate Representative Yang. Then Captain Garcia said, "Oh, I like that idea. Large parts of the southern hemisphere of GK 10.2 are actually pretty similar to the Umfaga homeworld, meaning pretty uncomfortable to the rest of us. We could set up a human colony in the northern hemisphere and an Umfaga colony in the south so that we have ready access to help them out with supplies and get them started." Dr. Abbas chimed in. "To make it less like a penal colony, I suggest we offer that they would be free to go back to their homeworld whenever they think it is safe enough to. Nonetheless, I second Captain Wilson's choice of name, New Australia. It certainly fits." The final day of the pause in negotiations started with moving the now refugees from the lab in the Killdeer to much nicer accommodations on one of the other ships that had more room for such things. Nala took the opportunity to visit several of the other ships and check on the other Umfaga as well. She was surprised, although by now she shouldn't have been, at the wide range of comforts the different vessels offered. Some were cramped single-purpose weapons platforms, some were vast with public spaces finer than the best luxury yachts, and everything in between. It was a way more eclectic armada than Nala had previously realized. When all 1,181 Umfaga refugees met each other for the first time on New Australia, they were going to have a lot to talk about. In the evening, Nala and her team met over dinner and drinks and scripted a strategy for the next day's meeting. When negotiations resumed the following day, they started pretty much like they had a week before. The shuttle landed, the humans made their way to the meeting chamber, and the two delegations, Umfaga and Human, faced off across Droma Xiena's table. Droma Xiena was thinking about how to begin when the little morsel moved over to within grasping range of Xiena's tentacle cluster. A bold or foolish move for a prey animal, thought a disconcerted Xiena. Droma Xiena, I respectfully request that you and I confer, one-on-one, alone, said Nala. Xiena was intrigued, and soon the room was clear, except for Xiena and the little morsel calmly sitting well within range of Xiena's poison barb. "Tell me why I'm not already eating you, little morsel," said Kashina. "Well," said Nala calmly, "let's set aside for now discussion of two battleships full of humans that would be annoyed if anything were to happen to me, and focus instead on how this could benefit you. I don't see any benefits for me or my people. I will never surrender my people into subjugation to a bunch of aliens, least of all to a little morsel like you. We are not asking you to surrender. We are asking you to allocate a substantial amount of suitable Umplogos clan territory so that the humans can build a spaceport and trading post. The trade itself can be expected to enrich your clan. Your humans have two large and heavily armed ships in orbit. You could destroy us, but you haven't. You could conquer us, but you say you won't. You say you want to trade, but why trade for what you can just take?" Nala thought about it and chose her words carefully. "They can take your possessions, your life, your world, but they cannot take your mind, and it is the Umphaga minds that they want. They want to trade ideas. You and I may look nothing alike nor communicate in the same way, but culturally and philosophically the Umphaga and the Reladi are more like each other than either of us are like the humans. To understand what humans want, you need to understand a little better how humans see the galaxy around them." Nala explained that both the Reladi and the Umphaga had a single language and thought of themselves as one people. As such, neither the Reladi nor the Umphaga ever considered if other intelligent species existed or how they would talk to them. The humans, however, came from a divided world of tremendous variation. Thus, when humans looked to the stars, they assumed they would find intelligent life drastically different from themselves. Humans started imagining how they would talk to and interact with alien life long before they left their homeworld and actually encountered alien life. "That is why the humans were able to build that machine," said Nala, indicating the translator. "Why talk to aliens at all? What is it the humans are looking for? What drives them?" asked Kashieni. "Fear," said Nala. "Consider this. I used to have nightmares about the Umphaga capturing my ship and eating me. I'm sure that tonight many Umphaga will look up at those two ships in orbit and have nightmares about humans. Think about the power that you have seen humans project a full 45 light-years from their homeworld, and now try to imagine what could possibly give humans nightmares." After a pause to let Kashina's imagination work on that, Nala went on, "Humans are fractured into factions, much like the Umphaga clans. But the human factions are far more varied than Umphaga clans and are constantly fighting. Those two ships in orbit were not built to attack the Umphaga, but rather to attack each other. However, when the situation arises, factions will join together, as they have here, to address a common concern. I believe humans have nightmares about something in the dark that poses an existential threat to all of them at once. I believe the humans are here at your world because they want the Umphaga, the Reladi, and every other species they come across to help them fight this threat. Human mythology talks about a united coalition of species. They want us to help them fight a mythical threat that they have no evidence even exists. That's paranoid, exclaimed Kashina. Nala agreed. But paranoid or not, the Umphaga still had to deal with the humans. A member of your species told me that on this planet there is a large beast called a Katigia. His mother used to tell him, when the Katigia comes, you can ride the Katigia, or you can get trampled by it. Droma Kashiene, please believe me when I say that the Katigia is here. After a long pause, Droma Kashiene asked quietly, Tell me, Ambassador Nala, how do I convince the Umphaga to get on to the Katigia? It was not lost on Nala that this was the very first time Droma Kashiene had addressed her by anything other than little morsel. Nala pulled out her datapad and started presenting her plan. providing Kshener with supporting videos, names and data along the way. In the meantime, the two massive battleships in orbit repositioned themselves on opposite sides of the planet and at a good deal lower orbit to maximize their visibility from the ground. In this orbit, they could be seen even in broad daylight, like small, dim moons. Sometime later, Nala was sitting with the security guards on the shuttle, watching a live newscast of Droma Kashine, dressed in her most regal Droma attire and flanked by her attendants, berating 5 lone humans. Nala knew that all over the planet average Umfaga were watching the same live newscast. As videos of captured hunter crews played on the screen behind her, Droma Kashine pointed to individual crew members from clans around the planet and called them out by name as if she knew them personally. And all around the planet, watching Umfaga learned for the first time that their loved ones were still alive. The humans offered to repatriate the captives, but Droma Kashine told the humans that, having contaminated them, the humans were now responsible for their safety and welfare and decontamination, and asked what were the humans going to do about that. The humans conferred, and one of them presented survey data of a world 15 light-years away, where they would set up a colony. The Umfaga crews could live there until they were sufficiently decontaminated. All around the planet, the xenophobic extremists saw that they wouldn't have to deal with this, while more progressive Umfaga marveled that they were about to get a second planet. "It's a start," stomped Droma Kashine, "but our ships can't reach that far, those few that you have left us with." She then demanded that the humans build a spaceport on her lands, where she could keep an eye on them, and that the humans transport homeworld agricultural plants and animals so that the colonists would have a chance. Droma Kashine further demanded that the humans would provide transportation of Umfaga back and forth when decontamination allowed it. All around the planet, watching Umfaga got a glimmer of hope that they might see their loved ones again someday. The demands went on, and Umfaga all around the planet watched as, while other Dromas had cowered before the humans, Droma Kashine was making sure their captured loved ones were being taken care of, and that the humans knew that the Umfaga would not be oppressed. The grand finale was the moment when Droma Kashine demanded that the humans remove those 2 big combat ships from orbit, and all around the planet Umfaga looked up and watched as the ships receded away into space. On Nala's lap, her datapad was open to the wiki page about a human named Theodore Roosevelt, who long ago laid out the 5 key elements of gunboat diplomacy. Number 5 was to allow the adversary to save face in defeat. Droma Kashine and the 5 humans were putting on a great show while the humans got everything they wanted. A month later, aboard the Kildare, Captain Nguyen and Specialist Mwangi sat side by side in the captain's cabin and read their new orders. Again. From Anglo-Euro Union Faction Representative Captain Brad Wilson. 2. AU Kildare, Captain Joe Nguyen. The Bantu Republic formally requests that the ambassador and her team provide immediate assistance to the deep space explorer JYB Kumasi. Therefore, Captain Nguyen is hereby ordered to make accommodations for the current 5 members of the ambassador's team and proceed to rendezvous with the JYB Kumasi at the coordinates provided below. Upon rendezvous, the Kildare shall make accommodations for an additional team member, Dr. Irumba Apio. Dr. Apio will brief the ambassador and Kildare senior staff on the situation at that time. The ambassador, capital T, capital A, 3 times in case we missed it, said Joe. Almasi said quietly, "Joe, she didn't ask for any of this. She was happy studying small, furry endotherms in the forest, and we snatched her away." Joe looked at the orders, and I doubt the Kumasi found small, furry endotherms either. If it were that pleasant, they would have said so. The complete lack of information in these orders suggests that they didn't want to give us the rationale to say no. Almasi trembled a little with fear she was unaccustomed to feeling. I'll have the faction ships near us send over every container of chocolate hazelnut spread they have. She deserves that much.